Welcome to BESE. This is the Academic Goals and Instructional Improvement Meeting. Call to order. Ms. Ross, can you give us a roll call, please?
Yes, sir. Dr. Bofi? Present. Mr. Castillo?
Here.
Dr. Davis? Here. Ms. Ellis? Here. Mr. Garvey is not in attendance. Ms. Holloway? Here. Mr. Morris?
Here.
Ms. Orange-Jones? Here. Mr. Rock?
Here.
Ms. Boucher? Here. Dr. Weaver?
Here.
And our student representative.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Members, we have a couple of special guests with us here this morning, so I'd like to see if we could give them priority on the agenda this morning. So I'm going to ask for a motion to move item 6.2 out of order so that we can address it immediately. Chairman Holloway? Dr. Davis? Thank you. Objection to the motion? None heard. Motion passes. Members, we also have,
Your first item is on page 40, item 6.2, consideration of an update report regarding Louisiana State Police Crisis Response Safety Initiatives. The recommendation is to receive the LSP School Safety Initiatives report regarding the Red Panic Button app and the Crime Stoppers Safe Schools Louisiana app. A handout has been provided in addition to the backup.
Thank you. Can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you. Second. All right, we have a presentation.
Good morning. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Doug King. Mike. Thank you. Good morning. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Doug King, the Assistant Superintendent, Chief of Staff of Louisiana State Police. On behalf of Colonel Davis, who's in North Louisiana today, I appreciate the opportunity to be here before you. I know your schedule is heavy, and we really appreciate the time. I'm here to talk to you about our school safety initiative, and this initiative grew out of the Blue Ribbon Safety Commission convened by Governor Edwards in 2018. It was co-chaired by the Superintendent of the Louisiana State Police and the State Superintendent of Education at the time. In 2018, State Police also applied for a grant, which we were awarded for 2 technology solutions, no cost to schools in Louisiana. One of those solutions was a notification technology solution to quickly notify first responders of an emergency at a school to get the necessary resources quickly and safely to the school to mitigate any theft threat that may happen. The second technology solution was a anonymous reporting capability for faculty, staff, and students to report any things of concern so that that threat could be analyzed and determine if there's any credibility to it. We've had some challenges over the last couple of years, certainly last year with the pandemic. It was very difficult to get into schools, conduct training, and roll out the solutions. So as we hopefully begin to come out of this pandemic, we really hope to get re-engaged, ask you for your support in your districts to help us educate and inform the school on this no-cost solution. And with that, I'm going to defer to our subject matter experts, but certainly I wanted to be here in person to demonstrate our commitment to work with you to keep our students and our faculty and our staff safe in schools across Louisiana. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you all for having us again. We appreciate your time and consideration. I'm Jason Shavers, a lieutenant at our Crisis Response and Emergency Operations Center. That's where these 2 programs are housed and managed out of. We have a great team behind us, and I'd like to introduce them in a little bit, and they can come up and give you a brief progress report of where each program is, where they're heading, where they want to be. But we're obviously here to partner with you guys and seek some the partnership so we can move forward. We know that we've done a lot of great work, but there's a lot left to do. So we know that with your influence, we can scale these operations much faster and much more efficiently than we could on our own. So we're here to ask for a few things, some requests, and in that, I'll go down a few items that you may have in front of you. As Lieutenant Colonel Kane mentioned, when this was created back in 2018, by Governor Edwards, he created the Blue Ribbon School Safety Commission. He appointed our colonel and superintendent of the Department of Education. And having said that, we do currently have a letter of endorsement from both gentlemen signed. And so that's something we would seek from you, the board. We know that would carry a lot of weight when we go meet with the schools and districts to have a letter of endorsement. Second would be promotion. We'd seek some promotion of we have free virtual presentations, virtual presentations and material all offered free. These presentations and material are in addition to the 2 phone applications that he spoke of. So they're supplemented. They're all free. They're offered to students, teachers, faculty, and first responders. They cover such topics as bullying, online safety, dangers of drugs, mental health wellness, suicide prevention, saying no to violence. There's some Rave Academy training specific to that phone application, and also some webinars. So some promotion of those items. Third, we would seek promotion of not only the 2 phone applications, but all the material I just spoke of on your newsletters and websites. We know that would be very crucial to get out there. Fourth, we would love to have you as board members assist us in providing information to your district schools through personalized introductions. So we know that this program is obviously built on relationships, and I think that would go a long way to have some personalized introductions from you guys, so we would appreciate that. Last, introduction to any advisory councils or committee members through introductions as well, just to help further our initiative along the way. So, having said all that, we have our team behind us. I'd like to briefly introduce. They're going to come up, give us a quick progress report, and answer any questions you may have. I believe I'll tell you first, Miss Janice Ehaza. She is the statewide grant coordinator for the Rave Panic Button app. We have retired trooper, Mr. Paul Toots. He's the statewide grant coordinator for the Crime Stoppers Safe Schools Louisiana app. Also with him is Ms. Darlene Costanza. She's the president and CEO of Crime Stoppers GNO. We also have Mr. Travis Thompson and Mr. Euclid Talley from the GOSEP office. So if you don't mind, we'll bring them up and we'll move from there. Ms. Darlene, you want to proceed? Thank you all for your consideration.
Welcome, ladies. If you would state your name so we make sure we get it right.
Thank you. Darlene Costanza, and
Please make sure that your microphone is ready. Thank you.
Darlene Costanza, and President and CEO for Crime Stoppers.
Yes, Janice Ehaza. I work for the state police, and as you can see, I'm not a trooper, but I am the statewide grant coordinator for the Rave Panic Button app.
So thank you so much for allowing us to present to you today. And many people have heard the name Crime Stoppers. We are actually international organization, but there are Crime Stopper programs and units across Louisiana. And the Crime Stoppers that I'm with is Crime Stoppers Inc. or Crime Stoppers GNO. We cover the metropolitan area and the surrounding river parishes. Our organization has been one of the ones in the state to really move forward many years ago in the school safety environment. Actually, I've been with the program 26 years. I was just out of high school. And we started working in Orleans Parish because there was a school shooting there. And I can tell you that a tip solved that school shooting. It was John McDonough. And we moved forward, understanding that Crime Stoppers is not just a reporting mechanism, it's a mechanism to be holistic. And that's why this organization spent a lot of time and resources in developing the component that we have today, the Safe Schools app. We know it works. We have received, with this new application, this new P3 app, over 2,700 tips from students in our geographic area. That's before we expanded. Of those tips, I can guarantee you that we've received many threats of violence, weapons, drugs. Drugs are number one issues, drugs and alcohol. But what's creeping up very quickly, and this is why we were so interested in being here today, is the mental health concerns. The majority of the students who are calling us or reporting from their friends, concerned about their friends, but we do have first-person reporting. And with our app, Kids can send us videos, they can upload photos, and most importantly, it's real time. So we have the ability to dialogue with these students if they're in a crisis situation and make sure we match them to the help that they need. So this is what this app is all about. This is what we brought to the table for the, with Louisiana State Police, and we started in COVID, so aren't we lucky? We were approved in COVID in March, and since then, we have over 402 schools live using the app. We have that's about 20 parishes, and we have an additional 63 school systems that are in the training process. But as the state police has said, it's been very difficult, as you know, during these COVID environments to get the attention of the school systems, and we understand that. So moving forward, the goal is really to get more schools engaged over the summer to do the training so that we can promote this wonderful resource during the school year, for the new school year. And I can tell you that one of our best success stories is Jefferson Parish Schools. So we certainly, ask that if you have a question about Crime Stoppers, St. Tammany Schools, there are people here who can vouch for the program that we're offering. But I can guarantee you that this is a program that it saves lives, it saves schools, it allows them to be proactive, because again, this is not meant to be after the fact only, this is proactive. And it's also engaging students in many other ways, not just drugs and alcohol, but many other ways that they're seeing concerns. And I say that because one of the main concerns that we're seeing besides the mental health is relationship imbalances. We might call that dating violence. So there's a lot of things that we're talking about with students that they are reporting on that's going to move beyond just the school community. So I thank you once again for allowing us to be here, and we look so forward to working over the next 3 years with the school systems and hopefully with your blessing.
Again, I'd like to thank Ms. Holloway for accepting our request to present to you this morning. And of course, her wonderful staff, Ms. Davis and Nikki, who helped us with all the information that we needed to present. My job is to ensure that every school, parish, district in this state of Louisiana, that they are educated and informed of the Rave Panic Button app. And if they choose to implement, because this is voluntary, to provide all the necessary assistance to do so. And you have a packet, our current status. We are in year 2. As a lot of you all may know, we kicked off August 2019. In your folder, you have our current stats with the breakdown of public schools, non-public schools, charters, and a percentage of parishes. But just to round it off, around 51% of the schools in the states have opted in to implement the Rave Panic Button, with 30% of them gone live. The question may be asked, what's blocking the schools from going live? Of course, live means that when you press that button, that when an incident occurs, you're live and ready to go. The answer is 30 to 40 minutes of an individual school parish time to provide us with an administrator to create a profile with faculty and staff information and upload this profile to our system. Now, we can assist them with the majority of the information like geofencing schools and grounds. However, we understand with the pandemic, hurricanes, our school closure, asking for 1 minute is like asking for 4 hours of personnel time. They just don't have the time, and we do understand that. I like to include, but not limit to, areas where significant progress have been met. Lafayette Parish Schools, EPR Schools, New Orleans Archdiocese Schools, and Tangier Schools. And I'm hoping when we leave this meeting, we can check yes to St. Bernard Parish and Alexandra Archdiocese. Also, we're very proud to say since the kickoff, we have provided over 120 presentations and trainings to schools, school officials, first responders, 911 communication centers, local law enforcement, conferences, community leaders, and so on. As you can see in our list of activities, even through the pandemic, even through the school closures, we have plowed through. So I missed at year one challenge, and it's still now the challenge is funding. Well, we answered that question and we've solved that problem. The funding for both of these programs is included in the state budget. So that's no longer a problem, no longer an obstacle. It was at that time. So with that said, I'll close out for any questions, any concerns.
Thanks for that. So members, it sounds like we've got a fully funded project here with some excellent resources, and they're looking for us for some help. Comments from members, please.
I would like to say something. Yeah, thank you, James, for being here, and the rest of you. I truly appreciate this, and I can speak as an experienced administrator, and not only on the school level, but on the district level, and with this program. Truly believe in it, and it was so useful when we, as administrators, did come into contact. I did come into contact with the school shooter or medical bomb threat, and the list, suicide, the list goes on, and administrators are put into a situation of how do we handle this, even though we trained and I have that experience to move forward with a crisis response team. We knew that your backup was so important. The best part of the program is no cost to any school, so that's a plus. You know, so educators like that part. You know, you don't have to use your school budget to have access to this. So thank you for your efforts in supporting, and the governor supports it, and the Louisiana State Police. Thank you. I would like to make a motion of endorsement in support of this partnership. I don't know how I would state that, please.
You can make a substitute motion to endorse. We need a second, and then we can go on.
In support of the program. Karen?
Someone shown you a comment? Okay.
Substitute motion.
Okay, thank you. Members, do we have any objection to the motion? I'm sorry, further discussion before we
Oh, I wanted to add one more. If you note that map 143, I have to just give kudos to District 3. It looks great because the district of my area
Yes.
are working it. The superintendents are working, they're really pleased, and they're moving forward, even through the COVID pandemic.
Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you. Members, further discussion? No further discussion?
I'd like to say I also serve as a high school principal, and I send a text message, so we can follow up after. Thank you.
Good.
Ms. Jones?
Thank you. Thank you for the informative presentation. Thank you for the informative, is that better?
Yeah.
Thank you for the informative presentation. What I'm trying to understand is what is the biggest barrier to scale? I hear you saying it's information, like, is that why, like, are there capacity limitations on how many schools you can be in? Can you theoretically be in every school across Louisiana? Like, what is actually the barrier?
That's our goal, to be in every school, public, private, charter school in Louisiana. And basically the barrier was, I think in the beginning, just the lack of communication or lack of information. Everyone just didn't know where state officials were. Now that we all on one page, I think it will be better going forward. We have endorsements now. And the biggest barrier was funding. They weren't sure whether or not we were going to be here this year. So, but we've solved those issues, and hopefully going forward. Just when we reached a momentum, COVID hit, and it just stopped everything. I was just hoping that we'll be much further than where we are, but we will with your endorsement and your assistance.
Chair, if you don't mind, I know Janet, when the question was asked just now, I see a couple of the gentlemen that are like wanting to say something. No? In regards to what were the barriers?
Like, I
You're
can just
good.
speak also on behalf of Crime Stoppers. Really, the barrier No, we should be in every school, and there is no limitation. Other than the anonymous reporting, we're really not gearing for elementary schools, certainly middle and high schools. But we do educational programs for the babies, because they're seeing things, we know that they're seeing things. The other thing I want to just make sure everybody understands, this is not just student reporting. There are teachers reporting these through this app, and sometimes parents will cross over. We have a community app that's for adults. But what's wonderful about this school app, it's in the kids' language. It looks, it feels, it's comfortable for kids to use. But yes, it's just coming through with COVID, with getting everybody's attention, with the lack of resources of everybody's time. You know, that's truly been the only.
I have another follow-up, Chairman, if I could. So if the barrier was financial, but it no longer is, and now, of course, it sounds like you're disseminating information that can be helpful. You are a global organization, so you likely have more information on this than we might have, but what are partnering states? Are there any partner states that are models in terms of the scale that's been achieved with your project that you know of?
Not actually with Crime Stoppers. We're the first to be the statewide initiative. Crime Stoppers certainly has hotlines in Texas and multiple other states. But what I will tell you is that we're using the same product as all the other large reporting systems, P3. It's now Navigate 360. That's Sandy Hook Promise, that's Safe to Tell, that's all the large names. So they've already done it. We've seen that tool, and being in the business that we've been in for 35 years, Crime Stoppers is for us accepting materials, accepting anonymous information. Yeah, it's been a natural fit.
And Brain Planning app has been implemented in other states like Arkansas, and off my head right now, I'll tell you all the other states, but they've had proven success. One of the advantages other states have had is that they've had a legislative commitment stating that you have to do this. Remember, with Ray, it's volunteer, so it's left up to the parish, the superintendent of the school. And also, there are other apps out there. So, when I'm talking to the superintendents, I'm not saying, hey, you must use Ray. My job, I want to ensure that your school is safe. But this is the governor's, two of the governor's response to school safety. It's free. You have the state police here. We are training first responders. We want to be on one page, but if they have something else, that's fine. But it's free. And we are here to provide every assistance, any assistance necessary is our job, to make sure that the schools are safe and the panic button is implemented in the proper way.
And I do want to echo what Janice just said. As you know, this is the best practice. If you look at Sandy Hook, you look at Columbine, you look at all the stories of these terrible school shootings, anonymous reporting is key to making your school safe. Many of the states do have an anonymous reporting legislation in place. Crime Stoppers has legislation in place that keeps us as privileged information. So there's a statute that allows for that, so we protect our information. But again, legislation has been very helpful, particularly in Texas and in those other states, because it mandates a reporting system has to be in place.
And I just want to add one thing. The good thing about these two apps is that state police has looked at the whole picture. So Rain app is for administrators and faculty and staff. Crime Stoppers is for the children. So hopefully we bridge those gaps and we can come together and provide a whole safety for the school. So that's the special thing about both of these apps. You have one on one end and have the other end.
Members, any further discussion? Mr. Castillo?
Just a question about the RAID app. Was RAID always a K-12 app, or was it more of a college app? I understand that it's college genesis.
Yes, and Ray is going to kill me because they're not here, but they're also in colleges with a separate app for alerts. So they're in everywhere. Buildings, state agencies. I think they have them at DCFS, LDH. So they are everywhere. But just so happen they're here with school safety with the Ray mobile app. So yes, they are in colleges and they're growing.
I think the gentleman in the back wanted to comment.
Yes.
Raise his hand.
It is actively deployed at a
is it actively deployed, and that may have been covered earlier, in other K-12 systems around the country?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I need one more question. Sorry about that. Okay. So it sounds like in the examples that you gave, you said legislation was possible, that legislation basically said there has to be a reporting system. And then your organization was one viable solution. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That we know of this, any legislation like this already exists in Louisiana, I'm not familiar.
Right. Don't know.
We don't know. Okay. Seems to me that that would be helpful to know a little bit more about, if that is in the past in other places, because.
There isn't anything actively in the state of Louisiana.
Can you come to the microphone, please?
You're at the board.
Is that okay to use this?
Sure.
We appreciate your comments and you could identify yourself for us. Yes, sir.
Travis Thompson. I'm with the Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. Go back to the question.
I just thought it would be helpful for our board to know, from a legislative perspective, what statutes exist already that address the reporting issue, if any.
We currently do not have any in the state of Louisiana. I have been monitoring the legislation that has been proposed for this session. And I'm also gathering the legislation from other states like Arkansas that have those mandates in place, Maryland, Oklahoma, or Texas. We're seeing the examples that they are having, and we're kind of posturing ourselves to move in to have conversations with some of the community leaders. Hopefully we can get to that point in our state.
Okay. I appreciate that update.
Other comments, members? Thank you, sir.
So I just like to add one thing while I have this opportunity. As we, Travis, as we've done a lot of research in other states, one of the problems that the disconnect that we see probably has influenced our ability to implement both apps is that school safety here in Louisiana is all over the place. It's not under one umbrella. And if it was under umbrella, we'll be able to regulate it better, we'll be able to present it better, and we'll have more control over dissemination of information. And it's just something that, you know, as I work this project, I will find that hopefully going forward, that we as a state would consider, you know, putting school safety under one umbrella instead of all these different places. It would better benefit our children, legislation, going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Members, other comments? Okay, I think we have a motion on the floor. If we could, reread the motion for the board.
The motion on the floor is to endorse the Louisiana State Police School Safety Initiatives report regarding the Rave Panic Button app and the Crime Stoppers Safe Schools Louisiana app.
Thank you. Members, we have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second? Second, Ms. Jones. Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you very much.
Members, we want to accommodate another guest this morning, so I'll ask you to consider another motion to move item 4.0 out of order. Oh, sorry, 4.1 out of order. Can I get a motion, please? Mr. Rob? Ms. Davis? Dr. Davis, thank you. Opposed? None opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Your next item is on page 4, item 4.1, consideration of an update report regarding reopening of schools in response to COVID-19. The department recommendation is to receive the report. You have also been handed out new backup for this as well.
Thank you. Can I get a motion? Ms. Jones, thank you. Can I get a second? Ms. Weaver, thank you, Ms. Weaver. you help me out with the recording?
Yes, sir. Glad to help. Okay, Mr. Morris, thank you for moving this item on the agenda. This will be very helpful for one of the guests that is part of this particular presentation. I will move through this reopening debt fairly quickly today. You have the information, so much of the information we have previously discussed on other calls, but if there's ever a point in which we need to provide further explanation, let me know. We open the report with the modality of instruction across our state. What you will find is with our new updated dashboard, it does, like the previous dashboard, require uploads from local systems as well as non-publics. And when those uploads happen, it immediately essentially populates into the dashboard information. So the information that we have is as real time as possible and is based on the latest upload from individual systems or non-publics. And so our February 25th information is the last time we did a download for this presentation. And you can see we have additional movement towards in-person schooling. We're almost at 70% of students statewide who are in daily face-to-face instruction. Where that is not happening at times is more around the high school piece, where some high schools are still in a hybrid model of instruction. But for the most part, we continue to move and see more and more face-to-face instruction, and I estimate that we will see more and more of that as our year goes by. On the new dashboard, we also have essentially heat maps that takes it down to the school level, so you're able to go in, look at individual schools as well, so long as that system has uploaded information for their schools. We also are in a good place in our state in terms of mobile devices. Previously, whenever we talked about being one-to-one in terms of device-to-student ratios, we were thinking about desktop devices. We were thinking about classrooms with a table maybe in the back, or maybe some labs that have been established. But now whenever we talk about one-to-one, more than anything, we're talking about the ability to have mobile one-to-one. And CARES dollars have allowed systems to be able to advance towards that. Supply chain issues, many of those have been resolved. And so from a device standpoint alone, we now have more devices in our state than we have students. And so CARES dollars help with that. Also, the legislature also appropriated $8 million at the end of the calendar year to support this endeavor as well. And so we were able to purchase additional Chromebooks for students at that time. That does not mean that every single system across the state, however, is still at one-to-one, but a statewide number shows that we now have more devices than we have students. So that is positive movement. We know, however, that having the device and having the student being able to engage through that device requires connectivity at home. And this has been an area where multiple agencies around the state, as well as agencies throughout the state who are not associated necessarily with state government, but a local government, have been working to fill the void around high-quality internet for individuals, for citizens. At the state agency level at the LDOE, we have been working on this as other agencies have, such as Board of Regents and the Department of Health. But none of us, frankly, are staffed to take on the broadband work. That's not our background, that's not our training, and we were all chasing it from different angles. So one of the opportunities that I think we have with the stimulus funds that have come to us from the federal government is to try to develop further infrastructure with broadband. I'm not sure of a population that is in greater need of broadband support throughout the state than our students. I would include higher ed as well into that thought. But we also needed an agency that could coordinate this effort. LDOE is not positioned to coordinate broadband throughout the state of Louisiana from the mapping standpoint, to contracts, to all the things that are associated with this. And so
last session, the legislature established a statewide office of broadband. At that same time, however, that office was not funded. And so the office was established, however, it was not funded. And so we saw an opportunity with the federal dollars that were coming into Louisiana to try and start that operation. And so Dr. Kim Hunter-Reed with the Board of Regents and myself had the opportunity to visit with the governor around his year's dollars that he has for education. And our ask of the governor was to consider using some of the year's dollars to fund the initial startup of the statewide broadband office. Because that way, even if a local system leader wants to invest some of the stimulus money, they would have a point of contact or an office of contact to understand how best this might happen. And so the governor thankfully agreed that this would be a wise use of the funds. The office has been since established with the Commissioner of Administration's office, which is a good fit for this work. The GEARS money has been set aside for the initial year startup. The Commissioner has since requested that we consider recommending in the next couple of years using some of our stimulus money from the state set aside to also fund so that we don't simply have 1 year of this office in operation, but we have a couple, 3 years of operation of this office. And I do believe as time moves on, the office will be self-sufficient. I think that will certainly happen. So I had the opportunity last week to sit down with our state's new Director of Broadband, Mr. Diengar, and we had conversations about, all of the stuff that we have previously been discussing and how education has to be a priority in this movement, and what the best practices look like around the country to further develop the infrastructure for high-quality internet across the state, which includes underserved populations in urban areas, but also the rural areas, which are very important to all of us as well. And so we've communicated, we've collaborated. He is hitting the ground running and is very excited about the work, and he comes with a proven track record of success. So we're excited to have him. So at this time, I'd ask him to come forward as we make a presentation to the board to see where we are right now, talk about some of our initial collaborations and what we could do moving into the future.
Mr. Eagle, I would like to start out by saying welcome. Wow, were we glad to see you. And looking forward to your comments as well.
Well, thank you. Whenever you move this. So, well, thank you. And first of all, before I begin, I want to thank the board and the state superintendent for inviting me. Full disclaimer, I have not officially started, though I have been spending and logging a ton of time. I'm still with Mayor Broom's office, and I will be with her officially in her capacity as the Assistant Chief Administrative Officer till March 26th. And then I will move and transition in this new role on March 29th. But before I really begin, thank you. Before I really begin, I wanted to really thank all of you for the yeoman's effort that you, your constituency, the administrators, the principals, the parents, the schools have all gone through over the last year. It's required, what this pandemic has done effectively is it's required us to be as entrepreneurial, flexible, patient, work deliberately but with a sense of urgency to really make sure that students, both that live in rural parishes and also in urban areas, are as successful as possible while maintaining that continuity of concern and care. And why that's important to me critically is my parents immigrated to the U.S. in 1970. My father moved to the U.S. in 1970. Mother joined him. They moved to Baton Rouge mainly to pursue a career at LSU. And they've been at LSU, they were there until 2011, and they moved to Florida. My wife and her extended family are full of educators. really focusing on elementary education. So this is critically important. This is ingrained in our DNA, in our blood. And so really what I want to do is to really serve as that resource to all of you at this level, but also serve as a resource to all of you at the granular level in rural parishes, but also in urban parishes. What I wanted to do was just to give you a little bit more context of myself. I grew up in Baton Rouge. I left in 1997, graduated from Baton Rouge High School, so spent the first couple of years at Runnels, Buchanan, and McKinley, then Baton Rouge High, and then went to Purdue undergrad, and again, really public education is critically important. You know, a lot can be said about Louisiana, the advantages, the disadvantages, the pros, the cons. I firmly believe that this state has a tremendous amount to offer, not only for people like myself, but also for our youth and for folks that are going through the public school systems. And I wanted to be a part of that solution, as opposed to being that obstructionist who often would say, well, why can't Louisiana do this? Part of that rationale came, and that reason for me wanting to come back has a large degree to do with what happened to the city of Baton Rouge in 2016. Right? So we went through a tremendous number of shocks as a city and parish in the state. So Mayor Broom recruited me, she brought me down, and her singular task for me when my wife and I moved back down January 1 of 2018 was to tackle the most difficult of challenges in areas of disinvest and really structure innovative public-private partnerships to addressing those challenges. And so really, as we start to work together over the next couple of years, I want you to take a look at and view broadband as just not, and the challenges associated with it, not just tied to the pandemic. I think what the pandemic has done is it's going to highly disrupted our ability in the past, but I think there's tremendous opportunity to innovate, create, and work with each other to drive a better success for our students and families. I mentioned in this slide that the pandemic, and especially over the last couple of years, it's created an accelerated disruption to converge siloed industries and siloed sectors, right? And so historically, policymakers, private sector, historically weren't talking to each other, but now what the pandemic has done effectively has fused both of those things. In Baton Rouge, we've taken a very active public-private partnership approach to solving issues around healthcare in North Baton Rouge, issues around disinvestment in and around Cortana Boulevard. And so it's really identifying the issue and then working with the private sector to help address some of those issues. I think my job is really to make your job easier, right? One thing I've learned in working in the mayor's office is I am highly accessible. I'm available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so my job is to make all of you as successful as possible, because the more successful we are in this partnership, the better it is going to be in the long run. Internet inequity is going to be critically important and a part of my mission to help work in bridging that gap between those families and students and educators that are in urban areas, but are in areas of disinvest, but also folks that are in rural parishes. And so what I wanted to do was to spend a little bit more time doing a quick survey of the nation, looking at a couple of states, a couple of counties as best practices and models. I don't want to necessarily go through the entire deck, but also then talk about next steps. I don't want to be overly prescriptive, because what I want to do and spend over the next 45 to 60 days is do a large number of listening sessions throughout the parish with different stakeholders to truly understand the depth and breadth of the problem, but then to also understand how we can really fill in the gaps while addressing some long-term concerns when it comes to broadband access, reliability, and affordability. If you take a look at this slide from McKinsey & Company, and you start to take a look at how states and districts have mobilized to equip students for remote learning, What I've done is taking what the states are doing in terms of internet access and improving access, and sort of boxed in red what you guys have done very effectively in the last 12 months. If you start to look at then at a state level what certain states are doing, what states are effectively doing, such as let's say Colorado, is they're coming up with state grant programs to help fund both innovation, but also help address digital inclusion, right? One of the things that we've seen tremendously that's been an impact is those kids who are on free and reduced lunch are not having the luxury of having access to the kinds of broadband needs that's going to help them become successful, right? Now, all of you guys have done a phenomenal job in providing that one-on-one equipment, which I think is a huge momentum driver. But one of the things that we want to start to do is to address issues around accessibility and reliability. And what other states have done very effectively is create state grant programs, which I'm again not overly prescribing, but it's something for us to take a look at and to study. What I'm going to do is skip ahead, and if I were to look at, and I'll give you guys the luxury to read some of those other state models. But if you looked at the states that we looked at, Wisconsin, Missouri, Colorado, Virginia, and states in and around the region, one of the things they mentioned often that they started creating initially was state grant funding to at least serve as an accelerator. They wanted to focus on a percentage of those students that are on free and reduced lunch, and look at student density per square mile, because the more they understand student density per square mile of those folks that are on free and reduced lunches, that's the hyper target that they wanted to focus on when it comes to providing accessibility and affordability to broadband. Education, I don't want to have to belabor, is the key gateway to improving broadband access and connectivity. And there's been an increasing reliance on hotspots, which I think you guys have done a great job in understanding potentially where those could be, but I think that's an opportunity to bring in libraries, to bring in business, to bring in sort of the ecosystem that feeds into sort of your education with school boards, but also a motivated private sector who wants to address locations of where hotspots should be. And those are all things that our office will be critical in helping all of you. Again, I'm going to skip some of these slides. But one thing that was really interesting in Hamilton County in Tennessee last year was what they did. A population roughly the same size of Baton Rouge and the parish of East Baton Rouge. But the county there received $8.2 million in funding over a 10-year period to provide a free router with at least 100 Mbps speed for all households receiving free and reduced lunch. So you're beginning to see thematically the hyper focus on the student populations and families that have been historically the most marginalized in terms of addressing some of their acute needs and providing both broadband access and affordability. I'm going to, again, skip to towards the end. And when we start to talk about next steps, I think, and this is something you guys are probably doing on a daily basis, sort of borrowing and taking each other's business models and best practices and trying to implement and jerry-rig and be as entrepreneurial as possible. But what we want to do once we get formalized in the next couple of weeks is start to facilitate what we think is statewide knowledge sharing and transfer of knowledge among districts and superintendents. I think that's critically important. And I think identifying absolutely what those best and existing practices are going to be critically important, because I think what you'll realize when it comes to broadband is that there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution for the challenge, right? So something that could work in West Carroll Parish is going to be far different than what's going to work in Jefferson Parish. It's going to be far different than what would work in East Baton Rouge Parish. And that's where I think you guys can take the lead in partnership with us and help develop guidance for school districts. Because I think, and from what I've understood, is that there is that disconnect between local school districts receiving funding, but not knowing exactly the best uses and how to best deploy that funding. I think, and this is particularly interesting, I think there's an opportunity for us to co-create and develop a toolkit. And really, that toolkit is going to be based on a decision tree that provides guidance on how broadband investments can be made between now and over the next couple of years. And I think that's a combination of short-term gaps, but also long-term solutions as we start to build what the workforce looks like in the not so distant future. So I think a toolkit that's really a guiding document for school districts is something that we can talk about. It's something that's a best practice. It's something that we can work with all of you if one doesn't exist. And then really, this is important, right? There's going to be, and based on data and based on conversations and based on news, there's going to be a tremendous amount of additional federal money that's going to be coming down the pipeline, whether it's part of this $1.9 trillion package or whether it's part of this larger infrastructure package that could come down the pipeline. Broadband is going to be front and center regardless. I think our ability to start to position Louisiana in front of federal partners, I think we have a number of friends now at the federal level that could be beneficial to us from making that pitch for federal broadband dollars. I think it's going to be important. So we're going to have to figure out and identify ways which will be very helpful on the best uses of that money and based on best practices and how we can work together to deploy that money as quickly, efficiently as possible. So with that said, happy to answer any high-level questions. Again, my job is to make all of you successful, to work in partnership with all of you. I think it'll be a challenge, but I think we have some huge opportunities to really define where education is going to go on between now and over the next 3 to 5 years, and look forward to spending a significant amount of time with all of you, individually and collectively.
Thank you. Appreciate your opening remarks. I have a couple questions. I know there's a lot of moving parts here, no doubt about it, both at the state level, at the federal level, and the local level. But I don't think you officially started day one of the job yet, right? So we're real early in the game. But if you could you give us some sense of the timeline that you envision for rolling out broadband across the state?
So that's a really difficult question, right? Broadband is largely defined by speed, right? Up speed, down speed. Broadband is also largely defined not necessarily by fiber to the home, right? There are models that exist where it may not be necessary to put absolute fiber to the home to achieve the goal, which is broadband accessibility, and broadband accessibility that's reliable, right? And so there is satellite technology, there's Wi-Fi technology. A lot of it has to do with terrain and geography. And so part of this effort is to identify, and part of this office is to identify the best use of technology and the best use of what would make best sense in different parishes. Because the aspirational dream may be fiber at the home, but what I've learned in having worked in the mayor's office over the last couple of years has been focused on the aspirational needs. That's going to take time, but in the interim, what are those solutions that we need to quickly deploy to solve the pain point that exists to it, which is fundamentally lack of broadband. So part of our effort, part of the effort within this office is to help define through that roadmap and through the strategic plan and through intense stakeholder engagement what the truly absolute need is for that parish and for that constituency.
Just a little bit more on that one. So if you were to, let's say minimum standard is 25.3, go statewide 25.3, is that a 5-year project? Is that a 25-year project? Can you kind of scale it?
So I'm not going to commit to time. I think I'm going to be spending time with the governor in the next couple of weeks. What I've told Commissioner Darden, et cetera, is I want to be deliberate because we have sort of first crack at this, right? And I always work on the assumption that the first crack is the only crack that we have in getting this thing right. And so I'm going to work as deliberately in understanding what the solution is, but work with a sense of urgency. So if the long-term goal is X number of years, my goal is to cut that in half, if not more, as quickly as possible.
My last question, what advice would you give to local school districts at, to your point, that they're expecting, federal dollars coming in?
Yeah.
I recognize this as a high priority, it's early in the game, but I'd be interested in what advice you would give them, at this stage of the game.
I think the best advice is to have them get in touch with us. Right? So, the state superintendent has my number and has my email that's gonna get set up, but that's the first thing. Have them get in touch with me. Happy to go travel and spend time really assessing what the issue is, and then we'll quickly diagnose what we can do to be helpful.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Members, other comments? Dr. Bowman?
I just wanted to put out there that I think as agencies are looking at receiving federal dollars, that there's an incredible opportunity to start bundling those dollars. And I just wanted to say it. I hope this is something that you can help lead and coordinate. And that might have been implicit in the things that you said today. But I do think it's worth mentioning. And I know even, we've had conversations about the federal dollars we're receiving and how we couldn't meet the need. But we're not the only ones at the table who have the need. Like there's healthcare that can benefit from access. I actually can't even think of any aspect of our state where it wouldn't matter, and it could support people in facilitating more efficient and effective services to people.
Yeah,
so I really hope you can lead those conversations.
Well, that's a great point. So there are over 50 different federal programs where there's a broadband funding component to it. 50. So there's agency, then you have sub-agency of sub-agency. And I was having a conversation with folks this morning about agriculture, for instance.
Yeah.
And so the opportunity is, as farmers start to acquire connected technology to help improve crop yield and commodities, I think that's a strong opportunity through broadband to help increase throughput and to help increase more of a return for farmers. So to your point, it's permeating every aspect of our life, whether it's healthcare, agriculture, our ability to even do business and transact with government, right? And so that's going to be a focus. It's going to be trying to understand where all those pots of money are, and then collectively pulling them together and focusing on very tactical solutions.
Ms. Jones?
First of all, thank you for the presentation and certainly thank you for your leadership. I am curious, I noticed in the examples and certainly the focus of your presentation, a lot of it is really based on some of the most effective strategies, critical inputs that might lead to outputs. Can you just say a sentence or two about how you're thinking about what is possible in this realm?
So,
Success looks like.
So success would be ultimately ubiquity in terms of broadband access for the state. Okay? It's
Everywhere.
Everywhere.
Learning can happen anywhere.
Yeah. I mean,
And what speed?
is, our goal is higher than the threshold that the FCC currently defines, which they're currently revising, and they're looking to revise, right? I think it's also important to understand not only the speed, but the reliability of that speed, right? The inconsistency that may occur sometimes can be a challenge, right? And so consistency in the speed is critically important. But that's the ultimate outcome and the vision is really for us to be the gold standard and to achieve ubiquity in broadband access.
Okay, and a follow-up there, so the examples that are provided here are those states, how are they tracking ubiquity? So what does that actually look like on a more micro?
Yeah, so I think they're focused on a certain segment of the population that needs it most, and they're understanding, working with local state agencies who those populations are, and whether it's through infrastructure equipment or whether it's through working with current telecommunications providers to create vouchers or to reduce that rate. That's how they're determining ubiquity, especially among those families that are sort of on the margins.
Right. And have they set time horizons, like Colorado or others, like what is the?
So they haven't yet.
Okay.
So that's why everyone's sort of figuring this thing out. In fact, there are states, we're actually we're not the 50th state to set up a broadband office. In fact, there are states that are now really determining and realizing that broadband, again, is going to play a critical role for the long run. So everyone's sort of in the same boat. We're spending a lot of time with the Pew Charitable Trust. They do a ton of work, and sort of they're the de facto organization addressing broadband. So we're having extensive conversations with Pew on understanding from their perspective best models and practices on not only how to best staff this organization to work with me, to work with all of you, but also what are those 45-day, 90-day, 180-day, 300-day gate posts that we need to hit the ground running, and what those KPRs are going to be ultimately.
That's encouraging. We heard from them last year, they visited us, and we trying to progress. It's very encouraging. So glad to hear that you guys have been there.
Yeah, we've been talking for the last several weeks. Yeah.
Other members, Ms. Bochet?
Yes, I'm very excited to see that we're beginning this process, and I do run a local school system, and I realize in many parts of the state, the issue is the technological infrastructure, I guess, for the broadband access. In my particular area, that's not necessarily the case. It's more connectivity for our low-income families. And part of my concern is, we've got this influx of federal funding, but it's temporary, and we're spending an enormous amount of money with devices, which I feel is going to be an ongoing obligation of the school district as we provide devices, as we do textbooks and other instructional materials. But the connectivity part of it is becoming more and more expensive. What are your thoughts on how do we go about connecting for the long term our lower socioeconomic families with that access? And I realize not just for educational purposes, but for all other life purposes. We've had discussions with providers about doing some of that, but there are continual impediments to that we keep getting. Families that maybe leave the provider owing monies and they don't want to reconnect. All these transients of the families themselves. We thought about making it a utility or something.
So we're still in the discovery phase. As I was talking to in the earlier question, is it really two questions? So ubiquity, broadband ubiquity is really important. Whether that means, again, fiber to the home, whether that means reliable internet, wireless, satellite coverage, is something we're going to have to determine, right? I think with the speed at which technology is moving, I think, for instance, satellite Wi-Fi technology may be the best option for your school district, right? And so there are a number of disruptive companies and innovative companies that are absolutely focusing on addressing that gap that exists in your parish or within your school district. That may not necessarily be fiber, right? And so part of the quick exercise over the next couple of months is to quickly really understand what that long-term play is for a parish, with the goal of, again, making sure that broadband access is available to everyone over the longer period of time. I think what the pandemic has shown is historically broadband has always been a nice to have, not a need to have, right? I think people now recognize even more that it's a need to have. So I have full faith that everyone that we put together through this office, telco providers, and all different constituents all have the same goal. And so it's our job to help figure that out and to work with them on those solutions.
Any other comments? All right, couple thoughts. When would we expect to see you again to get an update?
Mr. Morris, we will be happy as he engages more in the work to have him come back at his availability to address the board and provide some level of progress updates.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're always welcome.
Thank you. Look forward to working with all of you and your school districts and your constituents. Please feel free The state superintendent has my contact information, so he can share my personal cell. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to travel throughout the state. I think it's an opportunity to really understand what makes the state special. So look forward to spending significant amounts of time in the districts that you operate in, and look forward to talking to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And it is comforting as a school leader to have someone else answering the questions that I brought in myself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Drummond, you're going to continue with the handout?
Yes, sir. If okay, we'll work our way through this. So virtual instruction lessons learned, we have been asked to provide additional updates throughout the year on this. As you're all aware, the board requested that we as an agency have a process to determine successes and opportunities for growth. In the fall and that's early winter, we conducted over 40 focus groups, received feedback as well on surveys, and we were able to gather some information on strengths and opportunities from our first semester educating through the pandemic. And we disseminated that information in a number of different ways. That's on slide 11 in your handout. And the attached shares with you the number of different ways in which we provided this information out to our schools, our school systems, and our communities. An update at January BESE. The School System Relations Office has provided this information to system leaders. System leaders call that we host, LDOE weekly newsletter. We provided press releases to state media. Multiple media interviews were conducted around this information. We uploaded on the LDOE website, and we also shared on our social media outlets. Now, a few of the key findings that I would bring back to your attention from the virtual instruction lessons learned and frankly educating through the pandemic in the first semester. One, and these are the Westpac recommendations, inform stakeholders as soon as possible about accountability plans for the year. Should update guidance be released by Ed. That was one of the findings from the group. The next, provide support mechanisms and guidance on how to address absenteeism, truancy, missing students. Not directly related, but also I think important is something else that we learned is just the impact and concern over mental health of both students and employees through the pandemic. And then lastly, working with state and federal agencies to build out broadband access to rural Louisiana schools. And I was thankful that the new director in one of our initial conversations mentioned to me as he staffs a very small office that he is also particularly interested in ensuring that from a geographical standpoint, someone on his team has an understanding of North Louisiana and some of the geographical concerns in North Louisiana in terms of having access to broadband. I would also note, although it's not listed, one of the positives that we heard we saw time and time again, both in focus groups and throughout the surveys, is just favorability around communication, both at the school level, at the system level, and at the state agency level. You know, we have had so much to communicate this year, and received favorable reviews from parents and community members on the way that communication has happened in a very complex time. And so I'm very thankful for the work at the system level for all of that. Vaccine and CDC guidance update. As you are aware, I released a letter to both the governor and the Department of Health a few months back, advocating for educators, both certificated staff as well as staff members, to have early access to the vaccine. We also included in that request access to early child care centers, birth before centers throughout the state. This board followed that request with a request of your own. And so I appreciate that, as well as we have a number of stakeholders in our educational community, some of them are in the audience today, who issued a letter as well. And all of that did prompt educators and child care centers to receive priority access, and that was granted on February 18th. And you can see through newspaper stories, TV stories, social media, that our educators are taking advantage of this. We think that as more and more educators take advantage of this, the tendency for educators to have some level of hesitancy around this will continue to increase. And in fact, that is what is being shared to me from system leaders from throughout the state, that they're seeing more and more of their educators show interest in the vaccine. Our request never was a mandate. Our request was always priority access, and so we appreciate that happening. The CDC did release guidance a couple of weeks back on reopening schools. It was really affirming to us as a state agency, but also I know it has to be affirming to you and the courage of this board, specifically in the summer, around some of the mitigation efforts that we put in place. And the CDC guidance in so many ways mimics the guidance that we put out this last summer. So we were glad to see that. We will continue to watch this as we think about what next school year may have to look like. We clearly believe we will be in a better place by then, but there still may be some lingering impacts of the pandemic, and so we just have to be mindful of that, and we have to plan for that and make sure that we continue to keep system and school leaders close and engaged in the conversation as we have done this year, so that those things might be able to be implemented into next year as needed. I also want to share one of the lessons learned from the focus groups and surveys, and then data points around enrollment declines, is that we have seen a decrease in enrollment in our state compared to the last year of roughly 17,000 students. About half of these students, or about half of the decline rather, is in pre-K and kindergarten. So that is where most of the decline is happening. And so one of the requests that I made from the governor's office with BESE funding was for him to approve us to enter into a collaboration to work across the state to re-engage students and families into the educational system in some way. And so we are working to create the Louisiana Attendance Alliance right now. We have not fully executed a contract on this at this point, but this would establish statewide attendance alliance to promote good attendance practices for students, families, and schools. The office would be centered here in Baton Rouge. There would be satellite operations throughout the entire state over the spring and the summer specifically, working with local school systems as they need assistance, and if they need assistance, to help locate students who are not engaged in the system, being able to determine maybe where those kids are and what might could happen in order to get those students back. It's not a suggestion that local systems aren't trying to do this, but also there are only so many bodies at that system level that can engage in this work, and so we just don't have additional boots on the ground to support that. So there's a number of things, but ultimately the goal is to, as many students, as many families as we can support and re-engaging them back into the school system in some way, we want to accomplish that. And so that is one of the endeavors that our office will be working through over the next several months in the spring and summer to try and get kids as much as possible back in school, those who are absent, and as well as those who are terminated. Additionally, in your slide deck, if you look at page 19, we have information on an initiative that we are also funding through BESE dollars. As our team discussed many of the challenges that are being faced across the state this year, one of the concerns that we had is making sure that students had access to ACT, specifically sophomores, so that it would be a qualifying event maybe for them for dual enrollment, to give them an extra opportunity. We know that juniors already received in Louisiana a publicly funded ACT. In fact, that's happening across the state today. But this initiative also provides the opportunity for seniors throughout the state to also receive an additional publicly funded ACT opportunity. Our hope is that this would simply be another opportunity where students could maybe qualify for the college of their choice, meet the demands of TOPS, or have a higher score that would earn additional scholarships for them as they consider going into the next season of their life. And so we tried to simplify this as much as we possibly could. We are using about $2 million. This will flow directly to systems and and this money, they will sign an insurances form saying that this is what the funding will be used for, the vouchers for students to be able to take the ACT test on a publicly funded seat. So we're hopeful that this will be life-changing for many of our students who achieve the score that they might need to either qualify for the enrollment, AP, IB, or TOPS for the college of their choice. So we're excited about that. If we move to slide 22, this is just additional information and lessons learned around doing our best in terms of learning recovery. We did release our Accelerate initiative, worked with some of the best teachers across the state to build out tutoring lessons, specifically at the onset in reading and math. They are linked to our highest quality curriculum that we are using throughout the state. They are very scripted, and they can be delivered face-to-face or in person. I think our team has done some really amazing work on putting this together, putting it into the hands of school systems, because we recognize that with all the stress of this year, we also know the impacts of tutoring, but we did not want to put an additional something else on teachers, and so we want to try to develop that content here and then push it out into the system. And so that's what we have been able to do. We're having many conversations with systems around the state on how they are thinking about incorporating tutoring in the spring, but also how summer might also look. So let's skip to, for the sake of time, let's skip to slide 29. We are also having conversations with systems and encouraging systems to think about what summer programming might look like. For so long, many system leaders and principals and teachers have wanted to have a certain level of summer programming, but resources were not necessarily available, and so that is an opportunity that we have right now with Year 1.0 as well as the December stimulus, where we can think about how can the summer be utilized for, to all extents possible, full-day programming, recognizing that students have lost out on more than simply maybe reading and math opportunities or content area opportunities, but maybe lost out on elective type opportunities such as music or art or PE or those things over the course of the year. So, our suggestion, and of course it has to be nuanced within a local context, but is to have full-day programming as much as possible. Consider the driving force being those fun type activities that would have a kid smile and glad to be there, and a parent doesn't have to think about, well, it's 10 a.m., I have to go pick up my child, but they have the opportunity to be there all day. And while they're in those larger groups, to the extent possible under the health guidelines, you would then pull in to use the tutoring resources for the core content areas of smaller groups. And we really think we are going to learn a lot as a state around this tutoring work that will not just be good for this present year of the pandemic, but will also propel us forward in potentially a number of ways as we look at what does the research tell us about the benefits of tutoring. And so the last bit of information I'm going to share in the reopening deck has to do with funding. So we received the spring funding that was pushed out to systems as well as the competitive part that was utilized here at the state agency. But in December, we know that there was an additional congressional allocation of over $1 billion, the ESSER 2 allocation, and we know that about $1 billion will flow out to LEAs throughout the state. And we are doing our best looking at trying to provide a framework of, here is an allowability, a federal allowability, here is a crosswalk against a Louisiana priority area, and here are some considerations for expending those funds based on the crosswalk between these two things. And we feel like if we do that, again, to share, we feel like if we do that, we'll have an opportunity for more of a collective impact across the entire state. So you have some of the numbers there around that funding. It also includes additional funding for early childhood that we are also working through. If we move to page 35, slide 35, you see on the ESSER funds allocation, what we intend to do is to have two releases of that funding. Half is coming up this spring on formula funds, and half in January of 2022 on the formula funds. That does not include the SDA set aside, that's strictly the formula funds that go directly out into the systems. We have provided guidance systems, FAQs, we have office hours around all of this, so we're doing our best that we can to communicate around this complex issue to make sure that we're getting the most out of the funding, and also using the funding to promote actions or initiatives or thoughts that will take us not just through the pandemic, but beyond the pandemic. The next item, and this was a request at the board retreat, was to talk about the set aside dollars from the December allocation. And so I wanted to take this opportunity now just to share with the board that in terms of the set aside amount, a couple of things. One, we have been engaging for a number of times with a number of different groups to get feedback on ideas and what might be some of the best uses for these dollars. It also is worth noting that while in the MFP task force, the commissioner did mention no agencies would have a reduced budget. In terms of the Department of Education, the reason that is true is because of the fact that we are going to have to use some of this SBA set aside so that we do not have to reduce services out in the field. So there will have to be some of the SBA set aside issues so that we can maintain operations as an agency to continue to support all the work that is important. So we did receive a cut in the state budget that is approved, and we will have to use a portion of this to backfill against. So at this point, and I don't remember, I apologize to the specific board member who requested the item to be on the agenda, but we did want to take some time, hear from the board, get some feedback on the board as we plan through the SEA set aside and what we might be able to utilize those funds for over the next couple of years. So I'll just pause, Mr. Morris, if that's okay with you, and we'll facilitate that conversation.
Yes, sir. Thank you for taking us through that. Members, open for comment. Ms. Jones?
Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent, for the presentation. I know we're going to talk about the set aside, but just a couple of points of clarification on the district distribution. You mentioned some FAQs and some kind of parameters. Can you just say a little bit more about what those are, and then go a little bit further into best practice strategies on having any transparency into best practices on how districts will spend these large kind of sums of funds, how districts are planning to learn from one another on best practices, all that feels critical, and then I know we'll move on to assessment.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask Dr. Timmel to come to the table, who's our chief of staff and is overseeing operations of this particular work. But I will say one of the things that we intend to do in terms of public transparency on the dollars is to use that crosswalk of federal liability, state agency priority, and spending enter into a bucket where you can track out by system, for instance, funding was expended in this particular domain. And so then this board, the community can go in and look statewide. It would populate much like the dashboard. You can see where that spending is taking place, but also at a more granular level, you can see that at the system level as well. And so Dr. Timmel can answer more of your questions around allowability.
Absolutely. So regarding the FAQs, we actually have a website. It's the Academic Pandemic Relief Funding Support, where we house all of the materials, all the questions, everything that we've received from systems. And so with that, we've collected many questions. We've had those questions vetted by ed staff, by Blue Man, by our own staff, to make sure that we're responding and specifically giving the guidance that systems are asking around allowabilities. And we're also putting out an allowability document that provides examples, but also like cost per unit item, to make sure that we give like a lot of clarity around how they should think about spending these funds strategically. Another crosswalk opportunity would be how do these align with our priorities and also focus areas. And so, again, we're housing that all at the Department of Education on the website, but since we've put this information out and since we've collected all of the information like from Ed or from CCSSO, we've consistently held opportunities for systems to reach in or for us to reach out based on their questions. And so we're making ourselves available, our teams available, either verbally or in written documentation.
Also, Ms. Owens-Jones, in this particular allocation, the non-public funds are not embedded into the public funds. So that level of entanglement that happened in the spring where no one was really prepared for that level of funding and that level of conversation, those funds have been separate. And so we recently released this week non-public allocations as well. And they do have a factor that does calculate in per law to give consideration for students that are considered economically disadvantaged. So there's a greater weight even on the non-public side for that as well.
Very helpful, thank you.
Other comments, ma'am? Dr. Davis?
This is regarding our wish list for things that we might invest some of our federal funds in. So for me, a big priority would be investing in behavioral and mental health at our local LEAs. In particular, I am interested in trying to figure out how to help our LEAs better access Medicaid dollars that are available to the state. In particular, they're important because the federal government, because of supplemental rules to how states can access Medicaid dollars, we are able to draw down federal dollars where the state's MFP dollars count as the match. And so if we can help our districts be better equipped to draw down these Medicaid dollars, these are dollars that we can invest in providing mental and behavioral health services to our school districts at a much reduced cost to our LEAs. And so to that end, I have been working with Sarah Broom of Thrive Academy, who is the leader of a local education authority, to talk about the difficulties that her district has had, her school has had in this process. And so we have come up with a plan that we have presented to Superintendent Rumley, had 2 meetings with Dr. Timmel as well as other staff members about the ways in which we might think about using some of our CARES funds or ESSA funds to make it easier for districts to bring down these dollars. And so it's not, our wish list is just under $13 million. It's a pretty complicated plan. And so I'm in the process of trying to figure out what's good for how to make this work from a DOE perspective as well as an LEA perspective. And I know that districts like Forces in St. Bernard Parish, we've had some conversations about this, and so I would like to see that as one of the big priorities for us, because I think that when we address the mental and behavioral health needs of our students, they're better able to learn.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Other members? Dr. Goldman?
Yes, so I really appreciate the question. I think there's a number of things, and I know, fortunately, there's a lot of money there. One piece I think is just connecting to earlier conversations we've had in terms of working with other agencies relative to the broadband issue. And what can we do collaboratively? I think any way we can leverage our funds to get maximum impact is always good. So I think that one comes to mind. Also, in just thinking about the fact that virtual learning is never really going to go away. Like I think we've moved into a new sphere, and while I think we can continue to improve it, there's going to be aspects of this virtual learning that's going to be more pervasive than it had been prior to the pandemic. And so I continue to feel that our educators would be better served if they had learning management systems that really helped them to be efficient in their work. I think our teachers are making it happen, and I'm proud of the leaps that they're making, but I think anything we can do to make that work more efficient is gonna be important. I also just think about the conversation that we had earlier today with our mentor teachers, is that we have a need. You know, this year it was 100 people needed waivers. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean maybe we should pay people for some weeks over the summer where they actually work on their certification? Like, I just think that there's ways to start to bridge that gap that we have in terms of where we should be in terms of and where we are now. So I think that's important. And then I go back to literacy, and I appreciate the emphasis that you put on literacy, Dr. Brumley. I understand that there has been a bill introduced in the legislature, the Steve Carter Literacy Program, and I think that's something that I want you to watch as well to see how we may elevate these dollars to help with the literacy struggles that we have. So I think those things are aligned as you think about the priorities that your department released, is that how do we take the things that we're already committed to and we already know that they're important, and that we use this as an opportunity to say, when these dollars are spent, we're going to be farther along than we would have been outside of those dollars. And those things are top of mind for me, and I know it's always going to be a tough decision, when it comes to figuring out how you allocate each one. But those are the ones that come to mind for me, and I just appreciate you asking, before the allocations are actually made. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Other members? Ms. Jones?
Thank you. Just to follow up, Dr. Davis, with your comments, first of all, thank you for your leadership on this. I think it's such an important critical focus area to be addressing mental health in such a creative way. I think the challenge with this, and also the opportunity of this particular source of funding, if I recall, is because it's a one-time infusion, one of the most, I think the unique challenges we have in spending it is how to basically have it be catalyzing, but also have a multiplying effect, so that it doesn't actually create additional costs later. And what you're proposing, and I had a little bit of an opportunity to talk to Sarah myself, is something that does just that. That is a catalyzing effect, and yet it will actually multiply in out years for something so important. So I'm really very much looking forward to hearing more about your proposal. It sounds really interesting to me.
Ms. Jones? Mr. Walker?
So I kind of like to talk about virtual learning from a student perspective. So for any parishes that aren't from the north, about I'd say a week ago, we were covered with snow for about 7 days where we couldn't get out of our houses. Water was contaminated, power outage. So we were focused on, with these snow days, they counted with virtual learning. And I was discussing with some of the students from where we started with virtual learning, right as COVID happened, we were using Google Classroom. It was really difficult, but where we are now, with my parish, we use Canvas, and we were doing Zooms at certain times. We had everything scheduled out. We had a scheduled plan for virtual Zooms. I see the improvement that we've gotten to where now what I've realized is, as a student, even though I'm going to college, high school students say, in my parish we have like power outage at school or a snow day. Those won't count as snow days, but they'll count with virtual days, to where if you miss a day of school, your modules and your school assignments are already at you, right next to you, instead of you having to go to school the next day and be a day behind. So I agree with Dr. Coffey that there still is room for improvement, but I like to see the advantage that we've gotten with all the virtual instruction included, to where when I was stuck in my house with the snow, I was still caught up on my work because of the virtual learning that Louisiana has put under our department. So I like to see where it's going, and I'm ready for the improvement in the future. I think we'll get there.
Thank you for that positive feedback. Other comments on the board? Dr. Brown, what do we expect to hear more about the funding towards the specific initiatives?
Yeah, that's an important question. We have, Mr. Morris, we have been working initially around making sure that our work to distribute the non-focused dollars has been appropriate, making sure that we are moving forward on distribution of the formula funds to systems, and simultaneously have been trying to connect or receive some feedback on this particular fund. So, you know, on a limited staff, our focus has been getting out these non-public funds, making sure that we're moving the formula funds forward. Because this is much more complicated than just, let me write you a check. There's so many aspects of how that has to play itself out. But we're in a better place with that now, so we will start to move more of our attention to the SEA set-aside piece at this point. So we'll be able to come back at our next meeting, probably with additional information.
Thank you, sir. Members, other comments? Mr. Ross?
Just a comment that I'd just like to commend the staff for the initial rollout of the non-public for the webinar. And I know that's been very taxing and all, because it's new, you know, and your staff really done, in my opinion, an awesome job. And I know it's been time consuming and all that, but I would commend you all for that.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. Members, other comments? Ms. Jones?
I was inspired by our student representative, just the level of insight that you bring to this conversation, having gone through the year that you've gone through, and given that all of this we exist to actually create the kinds of conditions where you can be successful along with your peers. It does make me want more feedback from students on what they actually think the funding could be used for. They've lived through a lot. They have lots of insight on this. And I'd be curious to know how we actually do focus groups or some sort of even essay contest, something that actually engages students in the process of what they actually think the priorities could be. Because I think they can really push our thinking. In the same vein, but on the parent side, given what all of our parents have actually gone through this past year and the kinds of insights they actually have around the future of education, I'm curious to further explore ways in which we might center them more as users in this process. So I'm connecting this to the earlier conversation we had, Dr. Rumley, about tutoring. Is there a way, for example, where instead of the tutoring being sort of distributed just from the district, that in fact maybe families are given vouchers to choose the tutoring options that are best for their students in some way, or other ways that actually we center the user, either students or families, in this process to ensure that what we're creating and designing better serves them.
Thank you for that feedback.
That brings up,
Dr. Bozel?
That just brings up another question for me about the magnitude of the response of the opportunity for students. And I wonder, Dr. Browning, if you all have received any indication of the extent to which the tutoring and or the summer learning is going to be available across our state.
I can share only anecdotally at this point, but I have been really impressed with the levels of engagement we're getting around this. So, for instance, if we host a department call on Accelerate, talking about the spring or the summer, you know, we may have 300 system leaders on that call receiving information and getting information. So, you know, I can't tell you X percent, you know, but I can tell you I'm very optimistic about what I'm hearing, not just for the spring, but the summer as well.
And then have you thought about requiring it?
Requiring,
Like the summer program?
we would have to talk on how that would work.
I mean, I'm just thinking about you know, the number of kids that we expect. Of course, I know our districts have benchmark tests that give them some sense of where students are. And then, you know, we still haven't taken the state test, but I just wonder where we'll be, you know, and don't want to wait too late to start having those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about that and what might be some levers that could further encourage participation. I have, for what it's worth, I have not spoken to a system leader and talked about summer programming where they have not indicated to me that they are doing summer programming.
so you think it's gonna be
light today?
I do believe it's going to be light.
Ms. O'Shea.
I'm just reacting to that whole, I'm somewhat in touch with other system leaders, and I don't think there's anyone who is not anticipating a robust summer program. I hesitate on mandates because each one is going to look differently depending upon the individual needs of the district. What students you're going to identify, the types of programs you're going to have, what interventions you're going to use, and what the schedule is going to look like. But I haven't come across any district, to my knowledge yet, who is not planning some form of a summer program.
Mr. O'Shea, I have a question for you on the summer program. When you guys are doing the planning, the funding component is obviously some consideration. How much advance notice do you need for dollars that would be available in order to plan your summer program? We're in March already, so just with regard to the decision the board might make between now and summer, just wanted to make sure you got plenty of time here for you guys to plan a program.
Well, we know the dollars that we have on that first round, as our funds, and we know what we're getting that will be released to us in June with the second round. So we have the dollar amount. And this is going to be, I'm sure, one of the priorities of all the districts, how we're going to approach that learning loss and what we're going to offer in the summer. So the availability of the dollars will be there, and we already know what the amounts are, or the estimated amounts.
Yes.
So that won't be a constraint. Other comments, members, before we break for lunch? All right, I had that one comment, there's gonna be a conversation after lunch, about the POC testing and potential options for that. So I just wanted to bring the members' attention on slide 19, that the registration deadline for the April PCT testing is March 12th. Just want to keep that deadline in mind. On that, the committee's gonna recess for lunch and return in 30 minutes. That would be 2 p.m. Thank you. Folks, welcome back to BESE. We're at the Academic Goals and Instructional Improvement Committee meeting. We're gonna return to the regular order of the agenda. We'll be starting with the consent agenda.
Your consent agenda is ready for your approval, adding items 5.1 through 5.5.
Mr. Rock, thank you. Do I have a second? Mr. Castillo, thank you. Opposition? None. Motion passes.
Your first item is on page 3, item 3.1, consideration of an update report regarding school and district accountability. The department recommendation is to receive a report regarding 2020, 2021 school and district accountability.
Can I get a motion? Ms. Jones, second. Ms. Holloway, thank you. Opposed? Hearing none. Oh, sorry. Discussion. Have a discussion, go forward.
Yeah, thank you. So just as a refresher to the board and the audience, at our board retreat, board member Castillo requested that this item be placed on the agenda. So the department doesn't necessarily have a written report or a presentation to share because our appreciation was that this would be a discussion among the board. However, we are making available ourselves for any questions you may have. Ms. Kathy Noel is at the table, as well as Mr. Andrew Shackett, answer any questions you may have. We'll take a moment just to pause and share some of the flexibilities that we have extended this year to school systems during the pandemic around the accountabilities. First, this board accepted recommendation around not holding teachers responsible for the value-added growth of their students during this particular year because we were having to use skip-year methodology. So that, the situation is that students were engaged in multiple years of courses across multiple teachers, and so it would be difficult to really zero in on the specific impact from each individual teacher over a couple of years. So the board made that decision and accepted our recommendation, so we appreciate that. Another flexibility that this board extended has to do with observations of teachers. Whereas presently rule is the teachers have to receive 2 observations over the course of the year. We brought to you and you accepted the recommendation that if the first observation was satisfactory, that there would not be a second observation required during this school year. A couple of reasons behind that. One, well, primarily, it would free principals up and assistant principals up this year to deal with issues relative to the pandemic and to also focus their supports on the teachers who needed their support the most. So appreciate the board's action on that. So those were a couple of flexibilities that were extended. Another flexibility that this board extended based on our recommendation is around negative labels, CLR, UIR, and not forcing schools into accepting those labels this particular year after testing, unless the system leader or that board decided to accept that label on their own, which could trigger various funding opportunities for that individual system. And so we appreciate you all taking that up, accepting that recommendation, and moving forward. So that is where we stand now in terms of flexibilities that have already been offered. We have received information from the Education Department at the federal level, and we were awaiting some of that information just to see what positions they might take. You have received a copy of that letter from Ed. You know, for us, it's very important, and I appreciate leadership of this board coming out with a statement supporting this, but it is really important for us to know where our kids are in terms of their academic progress. So maintaining that spring assessment model, we believe internally as an agency, is really important because we need to know where our kids are. It's been 2 years since they've had that battery of assessments, and that also enables us to make, first and foremost, instructional decisions for our kids. But beyond that, policy decisions, practice decisions, resource allocation decisions, that information will enable us and better position us to make those decisions. So we believe that assessments are critically important during the spring and also reporting of data. And so, we wanted to honor the request of board member Castile to have this agenda item available today. We wanted to make ourselves available for the questions that you may have, and to the extent you can answer them, we will do that. But at this point, Mr. Morris, we will step back because this is a request from a board member to add this, and so we feel like this is a discussion among the board.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. I'd like to kick it over to Mr. Castile. Mr. Castile, I believe you initiated this conversation.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Superintendent. And let me first begin by commending the officers, the leaders. I think the letter that they wrote was spot on, and it certainly responds to the comment that the superintendent made, particularly as it relates to assessments. We recognize that it's been an incredibly difficult year in the midst of the COVID pandemic. Having said that, it's incredibly important, as Dr. Berman just said, that we know where our students are. We've got a long way to go, and we need to be able to evaluate how to proceed beyond the pandemic, and hopefully we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. But beyond this year, we need to know. I think all students want to know. I think parents want to know. I think teachers want to know where we are. And I guess that's probably also a good time to pause and say, an incredible thank you to our heroes and warriors in the classroom. Our teachers have just been extraordinarily phenomenal over this year. At the beginning of this academic year, I watched my wife, who is a middle school teacher, and my daughters head off to middle school and to high school, math and face coverings in all sorts of devices, and they looked like they were going off to war. And that's really kind of what it's been for so many of our educators and our students. And I think they deserve, one, all the credit for that incredible work that they've done over this year. I think that it's incredibly important to also assist our educators in providing the important information that they need to have to go forward into next year and know how to proceed. So one, I think the first step is, as it relates to what the officers have presented, I certainly agree with them. I think that we have to do assessments so that we know. We recognize that we've got lots of challenges, there's no doubt about that. And we will have to perhaps make some consideration depending on particular circumstances. And there is no doubt about that at all, but it's incredibly important that we know where we are. I think it's a separate discussion, but a very important discussion in terms of letter grades for schools, accountability, what we do with that. I think that's another part of the equation, and one that perhaps we have some conversation about, or perhaps we have a conversation about at some point in time. But I think the most immediate issue that I think everyone wants to know about, given where we are in the semester, is what are we going to do about assessment. And I think that districts, though all those in the school community want to know where we are, and to sort of kick off the conversation, just thought that we should offer our opinion, offer our guidance, and most importantly, offer our support to our educators and school leaders around the state.
Thank you, Mr. Castillo, for keeping this conversation on the right direction. Members' comments? Dr. Davis?
I have a question about how we're going to handle, so this in some respects relates to the accountability situation that we're going to have to talk about at some point. If we have online students who are online because of health concerns, or they are online because they have a grandparent living with them, but there are very logical and sound reasons for them to be online and for them to not come to school to take an in-person assessment. What are our plans for dealing with them regarding accountability scores if those go forward? Because and correct me if I'm wrong, Superintendent Brumley, are those zeros that are mandated, is that in legislative statute or invested policy? And if it's in legislative statute, is that something that needs to be dealt with this legislative session, or we miss out on the opportunity to address it?
So I'll begin by answering the first part of your question, and also ask that Ms. Noel and or Mr. Shackley and Peter. But we recognize that we do have students that are virtual. We do have significant concerns around any notion of online testing in the homes, just because, well, several reasons, but maybe key among those is the investment that our state has made over the years in some of the highest quality testing materials in the nation, and us not having the desire for those tests to be released publicly, that would be a security problem for us, and then it would also prompt us to have to go into additional spending if those test instruments were released publicly. So we have made arrangements, and we will continue to work with systems around flexibilities on testing. So we have extended testing windows, but also, and Ms. Noel and Mr. Shackley can speak to this too, as well as your policy decision, but making testing opportunities available on the weekends or in the evenings or in sites where the family might be more comfortable. Now, will that answer the question for every single student if they are prevented from leaving their home? No, but at the same time, we are not in a position where we want to expose our investment in those assessments in the home setting at this present time. But as our team and accountability analytics also weigh
Yes, I will just add a couple of comments to Dr. Brumley's feedback there. In terms of the alternate site opportunities, we actually used that this fall with the high school assessment structures. That's just a simple application to test outside of the school building with a trained security monitor, someone who's been trained in test security. We actually had opportunities for that to occur in the fall, where it was done like at a church. There was an opportunity to actually take the student parents, brought them to the church. They were comfortable there, and we used that opportunity to test the student. We also had an actual teacher who chose to go to a home because they felt good about doing that, and therefore they did a one-on-one testing of a student there. So we're calling that the alternate site opportunity, and we have opened up a form, like just a very simple application that's filled out by the school, and then we're approving that. We are asking for a secure test monitor to be available for that, so that we can keep our tests valid and within the security structures. One other thing we're doing too in the spring, for those children who are just absolutely not able to test, such as a COVID structure of some sort, either the illness or quarantining structure, we are actually providing a COVID code that would be used, and that would be in place of that 0 you're talking about. That 0 is basically in place for federal regulations of participation rates. So that 0 is taking, that would be what would be used if we didn't have that COVID code. So that COVID code is going to be used this spring in some of those situations. So we'll have some descriptions of where that can be used. We also will have documentation in place for the approval of that code.
Do you know, do we have a standard process by which parents are being made aware of this alternative site option? Because I've got 3 kids in the East Baton Rouge Parish Public School System, and I haven't received any, I mean, my kids are taking the test in person, they've been in-person learning, but I've got parents who are contacting me, and so I know that, I haven't seen anything as a parent come through about these alternative sites.
So right now, we do have the process of working directly with district and school test coordinators, so that those individuals are getting this information. We, of course, are making suggestions on how they get that out to their community. Again, we're relying on them for that, but I can tell you we're meeting with them weekly and providing updates weekly, so it's not in lag. It's coming to them on a weekly basis. And Jennifer Baird is in charge of that group and does an excellent job of communicating. So we're really, we've done our part of getting the information to those representatives, and then hopefully they're turning that out in a way that gets to parents.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Solid.
Sure, thank you. Mr. Castillo, very well said. Truly, thank you for your words, Mr. Castillo. Appreciate that. Our educators are working extremely hard, and we're very well of that. Commend our superintendents all the way down to the workforce there, and of course, State Department. In regards to assessment, we truly believe that this is necessary to know where children are and how we're going to move forward with instruction, intervening, support, resources, etc. However, there's so much more to this, and what are the next steps? How do we move forward together in reassuring our districts know that we're supporting them, and where do we go from here? I'd like to make a motion, please, and this motion I've gathered. Ms. Davis, you have a copy? Yes. Please, I have a copy, but I'd like all the members to see the motion that I will set forward here, and see if there's any discussion? The motion set forth. I motion to direct the State Superintendent of Education in response to the effects of COVID-19 pandemic and guidance issued February 22nd, 2021 by the United States Secretary of Education regarding state assessments and accountability to, number one, issue guidance to schools related to test administration and provide communications resources to aid in helping parents and students understand the importance of measuring student learning for purposes of instructional planning and student support. Number two, provide as quickly available a report of aggregated 2021 test results and the extent to which results appear to be misaligned with historical trends. Three, recommend any adjustments or federal waivers or other forms of relief needed to ensure that school ratings and scores fairly communicate school performance and achieve intended purpose of identifying where supports and interventions are needed. Four, recommend any revisions to Bulletin 111 needed to address accountability for the 2021 school year at the appropriate time. And five, work with state legislators and BESE leadership regarding any legislation proposed for the 2021 regular legislative session concerning Louisiana state assessments and accountability for the 2021 school year. And I can say that this is very, I'm sorry.
Thank you for that motion. Do I hear a second? Ms. Lawrence Jones, thank you. We have further discussion on the motion. Ms. Boucher?
You know, first I want to say that, Mr. Steele, I'm not going to repeat everything he said. He so eloquently stated a position that I totally share with him. I think the efforts of our teachers and staff have been heroic. There's no other word for it. I do think in one of the earlier presentations with the focus groups, it asked that we at least inform people of the direction we're going for accountability. It will alleviate a lot of their concerns. That's probably one of the most asked questions that we get, or at least that I get. Where are we headed with this? What's going to happen with this current year? I totally support, I think we need to assess our students, and we needed to inform instruction. We needed to inform our planning for the summer, not current, and well, maybe too late, but some of the coming school year. We need to know where our students stand in terms of I support this motion that President Holloway's put forth. I just have a couple of questions and maybe some answers. The results that we're getting June, is that correct? We're going to be getting results in June?
Actually, we have results coming in by July 31 because of the extension of the testing windows for the balanced calendars. Some school districts had to actually shift the start of their school year this year to a later time, so we extended the window into the end of May. That is causing the delay into July for test results. So we have the vendor telling us that results will get to us by July 31.
So we won't have test results till the end of July. We'll be starting the year, really, for most places, the first week in August.
Actually, there'll be some exams that will come in earlier, like the high school exams will come immediately.
Right.
Then you'll have different levels of exam reporting dates. So that's the actual latest of all.
My concern is, and then Are you, in regard or relation to this motion, are we looking at waiting until, I guess, August to take a look and request, if we wish to request any waivers to our accountability program with the DOE, or are we going to look at everything basically in August then? Is that the timeline? Or are we going to look at it prior to?
Sorry, would you have any information, Dr. Bowman, about the timeline in regards to receiving the data and then returning back to us?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, just as a point of clarity to one of Ms. Gaucher's questions, we provided the extended window this year because so many of our systems got a late start that they were, having to plan and make sure they could be successful with the start. So we extended the window. So that's what's going to prompt some of the results being taking a little longer to come in than in previous years. Mr. Jackson, you may want to weigh in here in terms of timelines of those assessments maybe coming in.
I don't have anything further to add. Like Ms. Noel said, the high school assessments we will get back immediately, so we would be able to piecemeal some results there at the high school level, but for the 3rd through 8th grade LEAP results, we will not have those until the end of July. We will also have LEAP Connect results, as well as our English language proficiency test in advance of that July 31st.
Given that, like, we're seeing testing date for every age group, it's spread out throughout the calendar. The test results, do they come in, are they held as a group? It's a batch process where you get your results, or do you get your results same frequency the test are taken?
It's spread out on a schedule. So your high school assessments come in 4 days after students take those exams. So those scores start coming in earlier. We have to go through a certification process, and that's on a schedule as well. But they're done in phases. High school, then you'll phase in middle school possibly. Grades 3 through 8 sometimes come at the same time. It all depends on some of the structures in place. But we try not to get them all within one big batch. We try to spread that out at different times.
So do you get all 3rd grade results at the same time?
Yes, sir, we do. We try to keep some of it. We actually like getting bands of grades and content areas at the same time. So it's not like you're struggling to see results over a long period of time.
So finishing on or a couple of other questions, and if we would be looking to adjust our program in any way or request waivers, timelines for that would be then this coming fall.
May I just add one thing there? If you're considering using the federal waiver guidance that just came out recently and the details of that, they did send us their template yesterday. We've not heard of a timeline on when to actually submit a request for a waiver, but we do feel like they are going to give us a timeline. We actually were scheduled to have a webinar this afternoon with some updates about timelines. That actually is occurring right now, but I'm sure we can get that information a little later. But I think it's important to know that there possibly will be a federal timeline in place for any waiver applications if you're going to shift or look for guidance for the federal waiver structures.
Okay, well, I guess what I'm saying is I'd like to hear that the results of that conversation we're having, maybe at the April meeting, we would have more information as to what these timelines would be, and we might have to then make some decisions a little bit earlier than anticipated. For example, part of this motion is to work with our state legislators. Well, we won't have any data to talk with them about, while the USDOE as to if we wish to request any waivers in terms of our accountability program for this year. When are those deadlines? Do we have to do this prior to our receiving the data? Or can we wait until after we receive and take a look at how it stacks up? I do know that many of us feel that this is, the data that we're going to get, performance of the students is really not going to be indicative of what a school normally would be able to do with our students. And I'm not sure if it's going to be a true indication of what, I guess, the potential is there. It will be an indication of what they have learned this year. But I think we all know that we've had students, the same students quarantining 3 or 4 times and missing 14 days at a time each time they go on quarantine. We've got teachers in quarantine. There's been total disruptions. So while we need results to see where kids are, it's going to be a little problematic in that we're not going to see those results until after the new year started. But if I think we have to assess, we need the results, but I really would like to see if we're going to potentially request waivers, or we don't miss the timelines, and that we have a serious discussion about this next month when we know a little more information about the process.
Ms. Bochet, Mr. Castillo?
And to add to what Ms. Borsche said, that maybe the way to address it is, I likewise support the motion offered by President Holloway, but that as a part of that we specifically request that this agenda item, perhaps as written, just simply be placed back on the agenda to allow us to further discuss in April what new information we may have. If there's a webinar today, we may have some additional federal guidance, and that would just simply allow us to then make adjustments that are necessary.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Davis, Dr. Davis?
I have a question pertaining to the optics of us not having a plan when the legislature starts in session and they are dealing with bills regarding how to adjust the accountability system given the pandemic. I'm worried about not having a plan in place to be able to tell legislators, this is what we think ought to be done in the best interest of our children. So do we run the risk of legislation possibly passing that we would not be in support of because we have not thought out what needs to be done? And this is a question that I think, always open for discussion.
Mr. Castillo?
And it's a point I brought up at our retreat, and I'm thinking that, considering what Ms. Borsche just said, and the motion that's been presented, at our April meeting would be at the beginning of the session. That would, I think, by making this motion here and passing it communicates, one, to the legislature that we think assessments are very important and we should do that. And that, two, we want to make sure that we have the most current information in terms of guidance from the federal government, and that at our April meeting, with that additional information, we may make some additional recommendations, offer some additional guidance based on what that information has. I too share that concern, but I'm thinking about the time schedule, given that we meet again in April, at the beginning of the session, that through this public forum, it communicates to the legislature that we're not shirking that responsibility. We just want to do it in a measured way based on the information that we're running from the federal government so that we can do it.
Ms. Bochet?
Just one final question. And, I think I've done more reading, and I don't know if I remember if I read this correctly. Is USDOE waiving participation rates this year? I thought I had read that. Is that correct?
So part of the waiver structure that they have just released includes an optional component by which you could waive the 95% participation requirement. That is not a waiver of the assessment requirement. It is just a waiver of, to Dr. Davis's point, our ability to implement those forced zeros for students who would not test.
But that could be applicable to some of our students whose parents will not allow them to come in to take the test. Is that correct?
Correct.
And also, a part of that waiver guidance is we still have to publish participation rates.
Right.
But we're not gonna be held to the level.
We won't have to be the full zero with the accountability program. I thought that's what I've been doing. So that may help us and with parents who refuse to allow their children to come to the test.
Yes, our concern, of course, is trying to get as much assessment data as we can. So I think that you're making your statement really helps assist in making sure we get as many children assessed across the state as possible.
We all want that. We went through that 2 years ago
Yes.
over a different issue. We all remember when parents were opting out of testing for a different reason.
Other members' comments? No, superintendent comments, comments? Okay, all right. We have a motion on the table. Would you read the motion again, please?
The motion on the floor is to direct the superintendent of education in response to the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and guidance issued February 22nd, 2021 by the U.S. Secretary of Education regarding state assessments and accountability. 2, 1, issue guidance to schools related to test administration and provide communications resources to aid in helping parents and students understand the importance of measuring student learning for the purposes of instructional planning and student support. 2, provide as quickly as available a report of aggregate 2020 to 2021 test results and the extent to which results appear to be misaligned with historical trends. 3, recommend any adjustments or federal waivers or other forms of relief needed to ensure that school ratings and scores fairly communicate school performance and achieve intended purpose of identifying where supports and interventions are needed. 4, recommend any revisions to Bulletin 111 needed to address accountability for the 2020-2021 school year at the appropriate time. And 5, work with state legislators and invest in leadership regarding any legislation proposed for the 2021 regular legislative session concerning Louisiana state assessments and accountability for the 2020-2021 school year.
Thank you. Do I have a second to the motion?
We already have that, yes, sir. President Holloway and Ms. Orange Jones.
Anyone opposed to the motion? Dr. Davis?
Do we need to add the language about discussing this again in the April meeting? Is that appropriate, or could it be another agenda?
We could just, my opinion, that's in place on the agenda.
Action on the agenda.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Is anyone opposed to the motion? Hearing none, the motion passes.
I do have an accountability
Ms. Ellis?
comment. Can you hear me? Oh, yes.
Can you bring the mic on? There we go.
Is it on now? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Feel like we've done that a lot with Zoom calls lately, right? Can you hear me? I wanted to talk to Superintendent Brumley for a moment about an accountability concern that's very relevant to our seniors. We've talked a lot about seniors and our concern about LEAP 2025 and some other accountability issues regarding graduation requirements. Can you talk to us a little bit about your thoughts there and what we could do about that?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Ellis. This is a conversation that I've had with many of you on the board, and know that you are all most interested in being as supportive as we possibly can to our senior students who, for reasons beyond their control, may not have had the opportunities to be as successful on a LEAP 2025 assessment as potentially in previous years, for all of the obvious reasons that we all know and recognize. One of the things that I've discussed with many of you is just an idea around flexibilities for these students. We have received earlier in the year, right before the end of the calendar year, we received a couple of requests for waivers of week 2025 requirements for seniors. And you all remember at that point in time, I had indicated that I didn't think it was the appropriate time to have those conversations because we still had an entire spring of the year to be able to work through. Now we are at a point, I believe, where systems and students and their families are discussing graduation, and it's something that they've waited their entire life and worked their entire life to be able to celebrate as a student in our schools. And so one of the ideas that I've visited with you all about has to do with could we in this particular year create an alternative pathway for students who have already met their coursework requirements or will meet their coursework requirements, who meet their attendance requirements, who have completed their FAFSA, that have done everything that we need them to do, except for the fact that maybe they have not passed a week 2025 assessment. And so we also want to recognize that we can't just, or in my opinion, we should not simply say, here's a blanket waiver for this. So we have to build in, I believe, some steps and different avenues that a student could earn that diploma. And so one of the things that I had suggested is that potentially for this particular year and this particular group of seniors, that we might look at an alternative menu of options for them to satisfy their week 2025 requirements. And the first thing that I think we can do is, if a student has an ACT composite of 17 or a silver on their work keys for career diploma students, that we could take that in lieu of their week 2025 for this particular year. If they did not have that composite 17 or silver for our career diploma students, we could bump down and say, for the English band, if you have a 17 on the ACT in your English, then that would qualify you if you were lacking in English. If you were lacking in the math week 2025 band, that we could use and look and see, do you have a 17 composite on math? And that would satisfy that. And for the science and social studies, we could look and see, do you have a 17 on your science on the ACT? And then that could satisfy the science social studies band for this particular year. We know that we have some students across our state who have earned a 17 on their ACT, have qualified for TOPS Tech, and are ready to go into the next season of their life and earn additional education, but they're being held up at this point because of the week 2025 requirement in an unusual year. So we looked at starting off at an ACT composite of 17, or the silver on work keys. If they didn't have that, then you go into the different bands of composite 17 in the subject area. And if they didn't have that, at the conclusion of the senior's academic year, allow them to have a minimum, and we set a minimum of 20 additional hours of instruction in that week 2025 area by a teacher who is qualified, and we're calling that qualified, and we're saying, a valid or current teaching certificate, or a final competency evaluation from the previous year of effective, emerging, or better. And having a minimum of 20 additional hours of instruction in that particular area, and then having the teacher and the school principal sign off indicating that the student has satisfied that requirement and understands the content at an approaching basic level. And that can be demonstrated by a system-based assessment, it can be demonstrated by a school or a teacher-based assessment or a portfolio assessment, but they would have to indicate that they had achieved at the approaching basic level. And so by doing that, you create a number of different avenues in this challenging year that would allow some level of flexibility for seniors who would be otherwise graduating in May. And so it also signals to students that are behind them that they did not just receive a full pass on the requirements, but in fact they had to have certain ACT scores, or they had to come in after the conclusion of the academic year and put in more school time and then earn a certain distinction of an understanding on the content. And so, Ms. Ellis, that is the idea that we have previously discussed, and I think timing might be appropriate for us to, give that some discussion or make some decisions around that.
Yeah, I mean, it's very timely. Students graduate in less than 2 months and they want to know, am I going to get to walk across that stage? So I did want to bring that up, and I do want to make a motion to approve. I can read it back out. I have that written down here somewhere. It's a lot to say. But I do want to make a motion to exempt LEAP 2025 requirements for seniors in this way. Number one, an ACT composite score 17 for all students, or silver or better on word keys. And then that's for the career diploma students. And number two, an ACT subject score of 17 in the corresponding LEAP 2025 assessment pair. Or number three, the students can participate in 20 or more extended learning hours per assessment subject pair taught by a qualified teacher following the end of the student's academic year, and must perform at the equivalent of approaching basic. And then we talked about what a qualified teacher would be. A qualified teacher is defined as holding a valid and current Louisiana teaching certificate or a final compass evaluation of effective, emerging, or better. And then school systems will determine the number of extended learning hours needed. We say a minimum of 20. And the assessment method used to determine whether or not the student is performing at the equivalent of approaching basic. That's a lot.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. Who's going to get a second on the motion? Ms. Owens-Jones, thank you.
Mr. Morris, may I make a comment? Those changes, Ms. Ellis, you can probably approve that in concept, but those changes would need to come back as a bulletin revision, specifically so that language could be codified and the public can comment on it, as this was not noticed as a change in policy on the agenda.
Mr. Castillo.
Just a point of clarification, Ms. Davis, in terms of the effective date of this motion, in light of what you just said, does this action take effect, or does it not take effect until we complete the policy revision process?
You could do it as an emergency rule in April, and it could take effect, or you could authorize, I would be leery to do it, but you could authorize Ms. Holloway to receive the codified language and approve that, and then you ratify it in April. I'm not sure if there's a timeline that, as far as if it gets approved in March as opposed to April. But at least, getting this motion on the books, the concept would let people know that's where we're going, but we still have to allow for comments.
Thank you. Given that, Ms. Ellis, would you accept as a friendly amendment that this be considered an emergency motion such that it could take effect as Ms. Davis just outlined for us?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I have a question to that. So, Mr. Castile, can you, it seems like Ms. Davis identified two options. Can you provide clarity on which one you're suggesting that we go with?
The first one she offered was that today we could make this an emergency motion that would allow it to take effect immediately. We're all here today, instead of having to come back and revisit it, so that the department and all of our seniors will have some guidance in terms of how to see some certainty that we make the decision today. And I prefer that first option. That's why I asked Ms. Ellis, would she accept that as a friendly amendment? as opposed to giving authority to President Holloway only to do what we can do today.
Is that, Ms. Shannon, is that?
The only way that it could be is if we authorize Ms. Holloway to do that.
Yeah, so that was my understanding of what Ms. Davis said, is that in order to make it happen immediately, it would have to be under the authority of the president for an emergency rule, much like a lot happened last spring. We know that President Holloway had to provide a number of emergency rules. We weren't meeting, there was a lot going on. So in order to be immediate, she would have to authorize it as an emergency rule. To do the notice of intent process will take longer, is that right?
Yeah, and we can still do an emergency rule, which will take effect immediately in April. The difference is that I'm leery about this because it wasn't noticed as if you all were making a revision to policy. And yes, Ms. Holloway does have that authority, but it's a little bit different than an emergency situation. So I think, to me, the best way would be for you all to approve the concept, communicate that's where you're going, and then bring it as an emergency rule in April, and it'll be effective immediately. That would be the preferred way, just our open meetings law and notice and such like that. But either way, you can authorize Ms. Holloway to do that, if you would prefer.
So the two choices are, we authorize Ms. Holloway to do it, and then she might do it today, she might do it tomorrow, but she has the authority to do that. Or option B is that we approve it in concept today, that it comes back in April, documented as an emergency rule so people can provide input. And because we do it as an emergency rule, it would have the immediate effect of law, as opposed to like the 90-day wait period that the regular notice of intent. Okay, I wanted to make sure I understand our two options moving forward. Thank you so much, Ms. Davis. And then I'll turn it back to Mr. Castillo, now that I have that clarity. Thank you.
I'll yield to Ms. Orange Jones.
All right, I just wanted to thank, first of all, thank you, Superintendent, for putting forward just a really elegant suite of solutions on what is obviously a very challenging and important issue for us to resolve as a board when we think about the experiences of our seniors. So thank you for that. Do you actually have, before, as this board grapples with that choice point, is there anything we should know about the risk to seniors or to schools if we wait till April to do it that way? Anything we should consider?
I tend to think action sooner than later is probably a good thing for the planning purposes of the high schools. So for instance, if you have a student and you go with this concept and they have not met the ACT or work use requirements that we have indicated, there has to be some level of planning moving beyond the conclusion of their academic year, which could end at the beginning of May, to be able to locate the instructors, to be able to think through how would they demonstrate their competency, as well as just the other side of how systems might need to think through graduation ceremonies with these particular students. And so just completely from the perspective of that high school and the logistics of that, I tend to think probably sooner in this instance is probably better than later.
I would just add that there are some deadlines coming up in March for ACT testing. So some students who have this information actually could go ahead and register for another ACT opportunity.
Yes, sir, Mr. Castillo.
Yeah, just to close the loop on that discussion then, unless President Holloway has a different thought, I'd like to authorize her under her emergency authority to act as soon as possible and offer that certainty so that we grant her that authority to act when, to the superintendent's point of the schools, the students, families, to make a lot of decisions in the next 7 weeks.
Ms. Davis, could you give us some guidance on how we go about authorizing?
So I would just
How we
add
make
to,
that call?
yeah, you could add to Ms. Ellis's motion to authorize, I move that we authorize Ms. Holloway to issue an emergency rule to include.
I move that we authorize Ms. Holloway to move the emergency room today.
Well, if, I don't know that the department can have the, well, I'm not saying
As soon as
can't,
possible.
as soon as possible. Yeah, just add that to her motion.
Second on that. You're okay with that? All right.
Ms. Boucher?
Clarification. It's the first thing, 17 on the ACT or a silver worksheet, regardless of the level. Is that correct?
Well, the silver work keys will be for the career diploma students.
So if you're a top university diploma, it would have to be 17, it would not be a silver.
Right, I mean, that is what I was saying.
I was just asking, the 17 on the ACT or the silver work keys, I was wondering if the work keys would apply to all students regardless of pathway? Or is it just the silver work keys for the Jumpstart kids? And if your top university has to be 17 on the ACT? Whereas right now they can do either one, because we haven't changed that yet.
So the top level of achievement here is in alignment with a TOPS opportunity. That's where ACT 17 for university students is coming into play here.
I understand that.
So that's why that first level is that. The other pieces are in subscores, but the first level was in alignment with TOPS.
Yes, my issue is who can get the silver work keys to satisfy this requirement. Because right now, accountability, regardless of the pathway, the work keys assessment counts in the accountability index. So my question was, can the silver work keys apply to a child who maybe if he has a 16 on the ACT, but a silver work keys, would he meet this criteria?
At the moment, the recommendation is silver for the career diploma students.
And is that what your motion is, Ms. Ellis?
We have a motion, documented with that clarity. Dr. Brown, we have that ready to go for tomorrow, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I did have one question about the 20 hours, as an option. There's a lot of focus here, a lot of energy to make sure we don't lose any of our students and give them the best opportunity possible. Is there any way that we make sure that, it's understood that they can start that 20 hours as soon as possible? It doesn't have to be designated as summer school, as long as it doesn't intrude on the normal, annual requirement of hours?
Yeah, I think our idea around the 20 hours at the conclusion of the senior's academic year was, to have that additional time and also to signal to students who are not seniors, who are juniors and sophomores, they would be able to see that, this student did have to put in additional work. And so, our idea was not to embed it into the current academic year, but to have it as an additional requirement.
I just want to make sure that there wasn't any delay to start the 20 hours and then we lose these kids to some other summer activity.
Yes, sir.
So we have one public comment card, Maria Harmon. Maria Harmon wishes to speak. Ms. Harmon?
ahead and see if that mic will work.
Press the button, pull it close.
Okay, here we go. My name is Maria Harmon. I'm one of the co-founders and co-directors of Step Up Louisiana. We're a grassroots-based organization that advocates for economic and education justice. I represent parents in New Orleans, Jefferson Parish, Baton Rouge, and also Southwest Louisiana. I was coming up just to encourage that we do waive the standards for testing. I have a lot of parents who are considering opting out. They do not want to have their child penalized, their school, or the teachers penalized just for safety reasons. So I just wanted to express that, and I did hear what everyone said, so it looks like we're going in that direction to really make those things amenable. The other thing about accountability, I'm not sure if this is still in the focus of accountability within this concept, but I did want to raise the concern about Southwest Louisiana Charter operating in Lake Charles. Is one of the poorest performing schools in its portfolio, and I do have family members that attend that school, and it appears that they're not providing the services that children need. Also, they're not applying the bullying prevention policy that's in place by the state. That's why I'm bringing it up as an accountability measure. I've had a family member that was bullied at school, sustained an injury, and you guys have everything from the policy bulletin itself to the letter that's supposed to be sent out to parents. None of that was carried out with my family
We'd like to
members.
ask you to stick to the topic, please.
Okay, and the school did say that they do not have their own policy, and I found that to be very concerning, being that it is a school that is operated as a type 2 charter school. So you guys awarded them their contracts to operate, but they're saying that they don't have a bully prevention policy, and I found it to be very concerning, being that BESE has a bully prevention policy. That's where I'm going with this, but I wanted to lift that up.
You're not exactly on topic right here with the accountability committee, so.
Yeah, that's what I was saying in terms of accountability. How can we incorporate more rigorous structures of accountability to make sure that schools that are contracting to operate schools in our state that are coming through with their promise in their contract, because obviously that's not the case right now. And we also
We'll have unadvised, we'll have a staff member meet with you right after the meeting, and we'll cover that in any level of detail you'd like to discuss.
And we also need accountability measures in how funds are being spent with our public tax dollars. We don't have enough transparency and accountability around that. We need more transparent forms for the public to actually understand how the money is being spent. And also, there's issues about how the board itself does meetings, because they tend to change the time of the meeting rather within the day. And I found it to be very concerning, because I have parents out there who want to attend these board meetings at their respective charter schools, but they're missing the time either because they decide to switch it arbitrarily at 5 or 6 p.m. And I just found it to be very problematic.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
No further public comment. Members, any additional comment?
Mr. Morris, I just thought of another way we could do it, because I'm really worried about not being noticed. We can amend the agenda tomorrow and bring back the revisions tomorrow to do an emergency rule. It takes unanimous approval to revise the agenda, and we'll do it that way so that we have that, notice.
Members, any other discussion? Last opportunity.
Does that mean that we need to change the motion again?
I think you can make it what was bringing tomorrow.
Okay.
Unless something changes.
My understanding is we're still proceeding with the motion. Do we have any opposition to the motion? None heard, the motion passes. Thank you. Next item, please.
I have one more motion. It's
Ms.
about,
Ellis.
it's about, can you hear me? It works, but it doesn't work. Another conversation we need to have, and this this is something as an assistant principal came to my attention when my counselors and I talked about, what are we gonna do with all those juniors last year who didn't get to finish their credentialing due to, you know, COVID and we had to step out of school for months, and many of them haven't had an opportunity to finish those credentials. So I have some suggestions. Dr. Brumley, did you want to say anything about that too?
No, I would ask Mr. Bradford to come to the table if we'll be speaking around IBCs and credentials.
Ken Bradford, Assistant Superintendent for the Office of Career and College Readiness. Yes, as Ms. Ellis pointed out, I think it's worth the board considering a policy relative to the career diploma students whom are required to have a credential in their Jumpstart pathway as part of their graduation requirements. Our office has been working with school systems all year on this, but we do have students who, for whatever reason relative to COVID, may have not been able to actually get into the workforce or into their area of Jumpstart pathway to complete their credential. I'd use an example of, we have some students, for example, that do certified nursing assistant, and where they would do their residency to get their full certified nursing credential, perhaps was in a nursing home. And because of COVID, they were not allowed to go into that environment and do that. And so there's lots of there's lots of Jumpstart pathways that are culminating in credentials where those students, through no fault of their own and through no fault of the school system, may not have been able to get access to the required hours to get their credential. So I think it's worth the board considering perhaps an alternative for those students. I know we've had some discussion today about work keys. Maybe it's something around work keys. Perhaps for Jumpstart students that have a work key score of silver, that could be a substitute for them on their career diploma to meet the IBC requirement as well. You know, the work key silver, it is a job skills assessment. It identifies the foundational workplace skills needed to succeed in the workplace. So again, so if I am, as an example, I'm a high school senior, I was in a medical pathway, I'm in a certified nursing program, and I couldn't get the hours needed to get that full certified nursing assistant credential. If I had a work key silver, that for this year, for this senior class could substitute. The same could be said if it was a student in welding, carpentry that couldn't go out to job sites, etc. And I'll pause and answer any questions.
Ms. Notion.
Just so I would understand, the required clinical hours, say for CNA or the wellness, the silver work keys would be then in place of their IBC? So they would get.
Yes, ma'am, that is correct. That would, I would say that would substitute for the IBC that requirement that is for Jumpstart. You know, I'll give another example as well. We have several students that would go off-site to do their welding, and at those off-site welding sites, they have restrictions, and if they're on a hybrid model, they can only get there 2 days a week, so they may not have been able to get enough of the hours to meet the full welding credential.
See, I guess we should have been discussing this with you earlier, because we've had students in the CNA and they could not get it, so they had to change their pathway. We've been having massive issues with that, with students not being able to get their clinical hours because of the hospital and nursing home situations, not allowing these students in. We've had problems with welding as well, so we've had to make adjustments with students figuring they couldn't get their RBC and moving in different ways.
Yeah, and we've been working with a lot of the providers as well to try to find solutions to get them the hours, but some of them still, this late in the year, are still gonna come short, because even if they could start, they figured out the solution, some of them did figure out the solution until we were well into October and November, and so there still hasn't been enough time between October and November, and now we're into March, and they didn't get their hours, they need to get their full credential.
Well, I think it's a very, Ms. Ellis, I think it's a very worthwhile thing, because I know firsthand, we're scrambling like crazy trying to get different opportunities for students. And some of them are going to be cutting it really, really close, and others we haven't been able to
Davis.
So this makes a lot of sense to me. And I guess one question would be, what does this do though when these students go into employment opportunities with a credential that, you know, in a previous year, we would have said that this student had so many hours of practical nursing home experience, and now they're going to an employer this year, they'll have the same diploma credential, but be behind in the skill set. So like, I mean, I just, you know, is there any situation where giving them a credential might be, you know, dangerous to the public or bad for an employer? Like, is there something that we need to do in terms of, I'm assuming that our welding students aren't immediately welding pipes at Exxon, right? So I just want to make sure that there's not, that we've thought through all of the ramifications of allowing the work keys to slip into place for those activities. And I think it makes sense when this is not the student's fault in any way, shape, or form, so we need to figure out how to make this work for them. You know,
Well, this is giving them credentials, be allowed to graduate, correct?
That's correct. It would be allowing them to graduate, and it would be allowing the work keys career readiness certificate of silver or above to substitute for this year's senior class for that
So they
full
get-
credential requirement.
Okay, so they would get their graduate, they would graduate, but without the credential. So this isn't in place necessarily like replacing the
Yeah,
credential.
they wouldn't have the welding credential per se, perhaps with a certified nursing credential in this instance that we're talking about. But what they would have, what we have to be assured that they have is at least a work keys silver certificate, which many employers already recognize as a foundational workplace skills certificate. So
Okay,
it's like
I'm sorry,
substituting one for the other
And
issue.
And I know a lot of systems in them, even after they graduate, if they have a certain number of hours and things open up, then we support them completing their credential after they we pay those.
Yeah, we do that. We call that the Jumpstart Summers Program. We're working with school systems already to do that again this year, where even for our seniors that graduate, they have the opportunity to come back and continue working with that school system throughout the summer to obtain credentials.
Great, thank you so much for clarifying that. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Sorry, I misunderstood.
Ms. Boccia, do we need another motion to capture that?
I think we actually just made it, right? Well, I can actually formalize the motion, but we started the conversation. So my motion is to allow a work key silver to substitute as the culminating IVC credential pursuant to Bulletin 741 for students who graduate by August 31st with a career diploma.
So any other discussion on that? Mr. Bradley?
I would just reference that with work key silver or higher, since there are gold certificates and platinum certificates. So work key silver or higher, that way someone got a gold.
Right.
Can I get a second on that motion? Ms. Boccia, thank you. Any further discussion? Any opposition to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. Thank you. Moving on, next item, please.
Next item is on page 21, item 4.2, consideration of the membership of the Social Studies Content Standards Review Committee and Work Groups. The department recommendation is to approve the membership as outlined. Backup documentation has been distributed.
Second, Ms. Harlan. Members, any discussion on this item? Mr. Castillo?
Just wanted to get a better understanding of how the committee was composed. I'm not sure who would best be able to answer that question.
I'm advised that Ms. Orange Jones and Ms. Ellis are, as the appointees to that commission.
Dr. Chesson is the point of contact for this Mr. Shields, so you can come up and answer questions relative to that. And thank you, Mr. Morris, for acknowledging Ms. Orange Jones and Ms. Ellis as being the best appointed liaisons. This committee is really important for them to be there, and we look forward to them serving as liaisons.
And this may have already been addressed by the committee, of course, and I appreciate the service of our president, vice president, But I know that social studies is kind of a hot topic because of some of the questions around some of the content that should be covered. From a diversity standpoint, can you share a little information in terms of composition, what is included in terms of ensuring that the committee has a well-rounded understanding of what it means to be inclusive, so that we ensure that we have the appropriate content that's covered in the social studies curriculum going forward?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Mr. Castillo. So we actually received 350 applications for the committee membership, which is really exciting that we had so many folks interested in being on the committee. It was a self-nomination process, and the first thing we did upon receiving those 350 was that we actually removed the identifiable information. Those committee applicants were asked to provide demographic information, but we actually removed that, and we scored based on a few different questions that we asked, and those questions included things like if the applicants were open to reviewing and revising, which is the whole point of the committee, and if they had some alignment to the guiding principles of this committee process, things like an inquiry-based approach and then representative of multiple perspectives and the diversity of the state. We then, and after scoring and ranking, we reattached the identifiable information for all of the applicants, and they were placed based on the seats. So as you all know, you approved back in December the committee composition and the work group composition, and so they were placed based on the role. And then we also were mindful of race and gender diversity, as well as locations across the state, to make sure that we were really, in the end, left with a very balanced committee that was representative of the diversity of our state.
Thank you, Dr. Chesson.
Any other comment? We've got a motion to receive the report. Is there any opposition to the motion? Hearing none, motion carried. Thank you. Next item.
Just to clarify, that was to approve the membership, not to receive.
Thank you.
Our final item is on page 39. Item 6.1, consideration of recognition of Mr. Jack Walker, 2020-2021 student representative for the BESE Academic Goals and Instructional Improvement Committee, an introduction of Mr. Zach Johnson, 2021-2022 student representative. The recommendation is to receive, and an updated exec rec has been distributed.
Can I get a motion? Dr. Bovee, second. Ms. Ellis. Mr. Walker. Mr. Walker, I've asked board members to consider your tenure on the board and asked them if they had any thoughts they might want to share with their experience working with you for the last year. So I'm going to open that up to the board and ask for board comments. Dr. Bovee, could you start us off?
I'd be happy to. I just want to say, in an exhausting year, you have brought a whole lot of energy to our board, and I look forward to seeing what your future holds, given that I know you're going to bring that exact same amount of energy to whatever choices you make moving forward. So thank you so much for your service and stepping up to do this work. You know, you think about it, we have one student in the state that sits in this seat every year, and I think you've walked with that honor in such a remarkable way, and it's been a pleasure to work with you.
Thank you, Dr. Bovee. Other members? Ms. Roche?
To say how impressed I've been with Mr. Walker. You have not been shy in giving us your opinions and your insights, and they've always been extremely well thought out. You're a very articulate young man. I can't wait to see what your future holds. You've been very involved. You've written that newsletter every month, which I thought was very impressive. You've been a member of the different focus groups we've had. So I just want to applaud your participation And just like earlier today, the insights that you gave, you're truly a wonderful representative of our seniors throughout the state of Louisiana, and very proud to have worked with you, so thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. O'Shea. Mr. Castillo?
So, Mr. Walker, when I was a sophomore in college, I was appointed as a student member of the Louisiana Board of Regents. Every time I heard you speak this year, I kept thinking that I was never that good as a student member. And I was in college, and so you have been an extraordinary member of this board. I so very much look forward to seeing what you will do in life. And so by all means, please stay in touch and keep us informed. I suspect that we'll be reading about you in the newspapers, so you probably don't need to contact us, but we truly enjoy your service.
Thank you, Mr. Castillo.
For the members.
Yeah, Mr. Morris, thank you. Mr. Jack Walker was such a delight, has been such a delight sitting here next to us. And besides being so articulate and engaged in our conversations here, I mean, I'm like, whoa, he's blowing us away here with his conversation that he's provided to us. And you're such a professional young leader, and your future is so bright. I'm impressed with your newsletter and what you have to offer, and you didn't shy away from a discussion, a conversation, and leading the pack like you did today too. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Holloway.
Ms. Holloway, other members? Dr. Davis, I tried to talk to Mr. Walker about engineering, but he insisted on political science, so I thought we might have a word or two of wisdom for him.
Well, I had major mood swings today when I learned that, first, very excited that you're interested in political science and in particular public policy, which is the area that I study in my dissertation in. So I was very excited to hear that, but then I was very depressed to learn that LSU is not your top choice right now for your college studies, but that I was happy again because it was my alma mater, the University of Mississippi, and the Trent White Leadership Program. So that is a wonderful program that if you go there, I know that you'll be able to accomplish great things. It's a really good program. I'd encourage you in your studies of public policy not to neglect statistics, because you cannot go wrong, because statistics are your friend. Does that make you happy? Ronnie likes math?
Thank you, Dr.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, invest time in those statistics classes because you'll be well served in your future. And then as you learn about the nuts and bolts process of how public policy is made, I'd encourage you to find a policy area that you're really passionate about and become active in policy advocacy. So choose a group that meets you and then go about changing the world for us. And you can really enjoy your time on the board. Thank you so much for serving.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Sorry about the mood swings. I apologize.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Other comments? All right, Ms. Walker, it's your turn. Do you have any thoughts for the board?
So I kind of just wanted to reflect on the year that I've had. So the first time that I came to a meeting with Cameron Doyle, it was, I'd say 4 or 5 days before the March 13th infamous shutdown. And Mr. Brumley wasn't on the board yet, so I got to meet everybody without masks, and we all had a good time. And then I heard about the shutdown, and I wasn't able to come to the May meeting. But I think that one of the things that I'm going to take away is making an impact. And I think I did make the impact. BESE made the impact on me. COVID, with getting to meet all the representatives. Where I started, I was a nervous junior, not knowing the vocabulary on the agenda, nervous on what to speak on. But now I think where I've come, I understand the vocabulary, I understand what topics are being discussed. I've got the student opinion from my school, from other schools, by sending out Google Forms. And I think I've just also created great relationships with the board. Some people I want to thank Dr. Boffey for starting the board with me and just guiding me through what truly BESE is. And I just thank you for just guiding me along the way. Dr. Brumley, I think it's pretty cool that I've been the first BESE representative to be a part with you. And I think discussing being a part of the North Parish, shout out to being up north. I think that's just a great opportunity I've had with you. And also to all the representatives for listening in on a student, because I think that's one of the most important things. Me and Mr. Morris had a conversation on that. where student opinion is something that we truly need right now. And I've seen with Ms. Jones, anytime I talk, she's always the first one to pitch in and say, I agree with that. So I thank you also, Ms. Jones, for everybody for listening in on me, because I think that giving a student a chance to speak his mind in front of a board of adults is one of the greatest things I've ever seen. And like I had a conversation with Zach, even though I represent the student of Louisiana, one student can't represent the opinion. That is why I've tried to push speaking to other students, finding out their opinions, and bringing it back with me. I also want to thank in the audience Mr. Phil. Dr. Boffey, some of you may not know, he is the founder and the leader at the moment of Louisiana Association of Student Council. I couldn't have this job without you, Mr. Phil, and I thank you for giving me this opportunity to be up here for a year. No matter how odd this year was for everybody, I had the greatest time, so I thank you. I also want to thank the Louisiana Department of Education Twitter. Shout out to getting me those good photo angles. They make me look good on the Twitter, so I really appreciate that. I get to take notes now, you know. And I just also want to thank anybody in the audience that has been to more than one of my meetings. Thank you for really listening to me, giving me this opportunity. Like I said, now I just got accepted into the Trent Lott Leadership Institute, where I want to major in public policy. So if I didn't have this role, and if it wasn't due to those photo angles, I would not be up here today going to Ole Miss. So I'll secretly say hotty toddy, and I just want to thank, like I said, I just want to thank everybody for giving me this opportunity.
Mr. Walker, I haven't met Zach yet. I'm looking forward to that, but we certainly appreciate your contribution the past year. We've also got a memento of our appreciation to share with you, and I think there's a big opportunity at the floor here in just a second with Dr. Brumman.
Oh, yeah. You want me to? Oh, yeah. Can I get one more photo angle before I leave? One more before I hit the hay. Oh, thank you so much. Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much. It truly makes it. I promise you, I'll Also, I give a little shout out to Mr. Phil. With doing over 7 years of student council, what they gave me was a pen with my name on it, and Mr. Phil's famous line is, "A leader always has a pen." So now I can go to college as a leader with a pen. So, thank you very much. It means a lot. I can walk away with
Chairman Hallwood?
If you don't mind, I have a personal privilege here to recognize someone who was also a former student like Jack. We have Andrew stand. Andrew Benoit Knockham was a former student up here as you are here 4 or 5 years ago, Andrew? Correct. That's correct. And Andrew represented the Lafourche area, so it's good to see you here. Yeah.
Now, Mr. Walker, I understand that you're going to introduce us to Mr. Johnson.
Yes, sir. Do you want him to come down? He's going to say a few words. Would you like him to come to the podium?
Please, sir.
Zach, if you go ahead and come. So I'll say a quick little something. So I got to meet Zach right before one of our best meetings. I got to have a little conversation, and I can tell you that he has the fire that me and all of the other best representatives, including Andrew, have had. So Zach Johnson is a junior at West Monroe High School. He plays sports such as soccer, powerlifting, and football. So you can say he's a man of many roles. He's a vice president of his class at West Monroe. With 30 on the ACT, he's a member of the Mayor's Youth Council. So he has quite the touch in student council and in government. He will be the BESE representative for the 2021-2022 school year. It is with great honor that I pass the torch and introduce Mr. Zach Johnson.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you so much. As you now know, my name is Mr. Zach Johnson of West Monroe High School, located in the 5th BESE District, home of Miss Ashley Ellis. And I'd just like to begin by expressing how very thankful I am for this opportunity. Roughly this time a year ago, I never would have fathomed sitting where I am at this moment. In the recent months, the face of education in our state has experienced nothing short of struggle and hardships as we've been forced to adapt to a school environment that is, in a word, unconventional. However, I have personally seen countless teachers and students this year rise up to the challenge. And it is my goal going forward to not only inform these teachers and students, but to voice their opinions regarding the crucial educational decisions that will impact our state this year. I am very grateful for the opportunity, and I hope that coming from a home that has two parents as educators, that I'll be able to express, that I will greatly express help in each of our endeavors going forward. And so, thank you. I hope that you all have a blessed day, and I'm truly excited for what this year holds.
Mr. Walker, what is the area code on your cell phone?
318.
Mr. Johnson, what's the area code on your cell phone?
318.
Good stock from North.
318 represent.
yeah.
Since the beginning. Thank you, Mr. Zach.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, welcome to the BESE.
Uh,
I'm excited. Thank you very much.
Ms. Ellis has something to say.
Yeah, my mic doesn't work.
So-
Over here again. I could have now. I do want to say I'm delighted to have Zach Johnson here. I actually worked with his dad when I taught at Westridge a while back. It's been a while, but I worked with his dad, and I'm just excited to have a representative from our district. He's actually from District 5, like you said. We share the 318 area code, and we need t-shirts. This is a new thing. Like, we
Oh,
gotta
for
have
sure.
shirts up here. I'm so proud to have you represent students across Louisiana. This experience will be wonderful as it prepares you for future work in leadership. And I just want to congratulate you again on your selection. We haven't had anyone from my district or West Monroe, which is also my alma mater. So I'm pretty excited and super proud to have you here. And you can sit right by me. It's going to be
Oh
really
yeah,
cool.
I'm excited.
So congratulations to you, and I hope to be able to help you along the way and have some good stories to tell later. So
Thank you.
congratulations.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. Members, any other further discussion? Hearing none, motion passes. Next item, please.
That concludes your agenda.